Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video, it's the return of the king. Not talking about myself there, but this is the third and final part of our Lord of the Rings breakdowns. Throughout this video, we'll be going through the movie and discussing everything including the book. This contains Easter eggs, hidden details, and also the changes Jackson made to the work. I've loved breaking down this trilogy and hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. So for one last time, please smash a thumbs up, and with that out of the way, let's get into the breakdown.
Authority is not given to you to deny the return of the king.
Okay, so in case you're a psychopath and you're watching this without seeing our Two Towers breakdown, then here's a disclaimer about the film and books. Originally, Jackson wrote the adaptation as 2 scripts before he was convinced to sell it as a trilogy. However, a lot of the work had been done in terms of what was going to be in those 2 films. Because of that, a lot of the Two Towers is stuff that the writing team made up or expanded on. So a lot of things that happen in the first 2 hours, that can't be right. 2 hours is just the first half of the movie. Oh god, this is a 4 hour and 20 minute long film. Because of that, a lot of the things that happen in the first half of the movie are actually things that happen in the Two Towers book. Due to that, I'll be referencing that a lot too, and going over the things in that book as well, which was very fun to keep notes organized for. Thanks guys! Anyway, the movie begins with a scene that was originally shot for the Two Towers. This would have appeared when Frodo reminded Gollum that he used to be called Smeagol. We'd then zoom into his eye, which would transition into the scene here. In Two Towers, he eats a lot of fish, and this would build off the back of that as we'd see him fishing. This is with his cousin Deagle, who he ends up killing for his precious. Listening closely, you can hear Sauron laughing as this happens. Titled The Fall of Smeagol, this scene was directed by co-writer Fran Walsh. Now with it being reworked, you might wonder what would have originally kicked the film off. Well, we were going to go along the path of the dead and then reveal this as Aragorn's dream. The title would then say Return of the King, and it would highlight this is how Aragorn would win. The King of the Dead would return and fulfill his oath, and then Aragorn's line would return to the throne. So it does make sense to start it that way, but the fact they don't also works as well. In showing how corrupting the ring is, we wonder if Frodo can survive it. It highlights the true battles to see whether this great evil can be vanquished, or if it'll cost the hobbits like how we see here. I do quite like that they found a way to show Circus's face, and originally this wasn't planned. As we mentioned in our prior video, Circus was just going to do a voiceover. However, they loved his performance and then used him for motion capture. Realizing he was crucial to the film, they then added this moment in. Now, this origin was explained to us in the Fellowship during chapter 2. There we learned it was Smeagol's birthday, and symbolically this takes on a double meaning. In this moment, Smeagol becomes a murderer, and it's in this that Gollum's born. Opening with him holding a wriggling worm, this sums up the character. It's quite sadistic in how it's shot, with him smiling away as he puts the worm on the hook. This is also mirrored in the fish he pulls out the river, which looks really sad, that may actually, very, very sad. He's desperate for power though, and almost revels in having it over others. He will also take the lives of others to get what he wants. Just in the same way he'll kill this worm to get a fish, he'll also strangle his cousin to get the ring. In Gollum's origin, we learn he's a murderer, which is the reason he was pushed at his home. This puts him in an opposite to Frodo, who doesn't kill anyone in the trilogy. It also foreshadows the end of the film. There we have a Hobbit versus Hobbit battle, which is also something we get here. In this, Smeagol comes out on top, and technically he beats Frodo at the end too. However, he ends up literally falling, which continues the fall of Smeagol. The worm shot also becomes symbolic because of how the situations get flipped. A dark power ends up taking hold of Smeagol, and though he tries to escape it, it still has him on the hook. I think one of the saddest things about the entire film is that a lot of the characters fail in some way. Frodo gets taken by the ring, and it's only through Gollum's intervention that it's destroyed. Gollum also gets taken by it too, and it's only vanquished because he falls backwards. So everything's just one big failure that luckily ends with them coming out on top. Gollum failing to be saved wasn't predicted by the characters, and even Gandalf thought Smeagol would survive. This is why when the eagles arrive, we can see he's brought 3 instead of just 2. Now, they also do something with the design of Gollum that we touched upon last time. In our breakdown, we discussed how Gollum's pupils were used to showcase who was in control. His eyes are wide and Disneyfied when Smeagol's speaking, whereas they're smaller when Gollum's in charge. For this film, they slowly make the pupils wider than that, but they never really hit the more innocent size. So what this shows is that Gollum's now a mix between the two, or you could see it as both coming to an agreement. That is, they no longer trust Frodo and will do what they can to get the ring. As an audience, it also makes it harder for for us to see who's in control. Super deep film analysis where I'm reading into it a lot, but I do find it interesting that this is how the character's introduced. It's in this we also get the ring being scooped out the river. This is the shot that was reused from Fellowship, but it also mirrors its fate. Bound in water, it will then be destroyed in fire as it's dropped in the cracks of doom. I always loved how it just sits there on the lava, and it takes a while to go in. Like, first watch, I was legitimately thinking it wouldn't be destroyed, and it was so powerful it would even survive that. However, I think it sits on the lava there to juxtapose the shot of how it's discovered here. We then see as Deagle climbs out the water, and I like the detail of the boat being on the shore to explain how Smeagol's there. Watching him look over Deagle's shoulder as well, as he slowly gets more aggressive, it's really chilling to witness. Cutting to black in between him strangling his cousin, I feel like this was done for a reason. It shows the darkness taking over Smeagol and how detached he is from what he's doing. He doesn't even look at his cousin as he kills him, and it's him just treating him like the worm. Now they do a bit of movie magic to save the scene. As Circus went up to Thomas Robin's face, the actor accidentally blinked. However, Jackson loved the take and everything about the shot, so Wedo were tasked with keeping his eyes open, which they did by freezing them in place. It makes them look even more chilling, and there's a lifeless feel to them. Smeagol then picks up the ring, and for the first time in the film he says, "Precious." Over the course of it, he says it 17 times, but there's also an additional voice here. Sauron talks along with him, with the characters now being bound together. James bound. Putting on the ring, Smeagol disappears, and metaphorically that's what's happened to the character. Gollum is now the one who emerges, and we see a montage of his transformation. The guy exhibits a lot of addict behaviour and is seen rocking back and forth throughout. He retreats to his hobbit hole, his K-hole, and lives out the centuries, with him becoming a shadow of what he was. Now, this change was achieved both practically and digitally. Sat in the makeup chair for 5 hours, they slowly added prosthetics to Circus. According to IMDb trivia, the creative team studied the transformation of Brundle in The Fly in order to get the gradual stages. Over the scene, they also used CGI to shape and alter his look. They made his legs skinnier digitally and also changed his eyes when he blinks. It's a great way to play out the moment, and it builds off a deleted scene from The Two Towers. That would have Frodo go through a similar transformation when he imagined his future with the ring. Sorry, I couldn't find exactly when they dropped it in that movie, but my guess is around when they originally showed Gollum's origin. It's in the scene that Gollum also says, "We even forgot our own name." This could be why he gained the name Gollum, because it was the voice he made when doing a cat coughing up a furball impression. So in Two Towers, when Frodo reminds him his name was Smeagol, this then takes him back to those days. That allows that personality to come forth and then tell Gollum to leave and never come back. Ultimately, he ends up retreating there though, as that persona as a survivor. This is something we see perfectly here, and it's such a good way to kickstart the movie. Now, after this we cut to some lembas bread and what's chapter 18 in The Two Towers. Titled Journey to the Crossroads, I'll see you at the crossroads, crossroads, crossroads. Yes, I know it was Bone Thugs in Harmony originally, but yeah, we're not about doing the good versions of memes here at the channel. Now, this chapter begins with Faramir saying goodbye and giving them food and provisions. Initially, he just wants to blindfold Gollum, who squeals that he doesn't trust the gang. Frodo volunteers to be blindfolded too, so Gollum can see no harm's gonna come to him. Journeying into the wilderness, Sam sleeps restlessly as Gollum keeps disappearing. He returns at dawn and says, long ways to go, which is of course a line we get in the movie. So that's the one time I'll attempt that impression. Sound like Yoda. The afternoon, as Sam supposed it must be called, wore on. Looking out from the covert, he could see only a dun, shadowless world, fading slowly into a featureless, colourless gloom. It felt stifling, but not warm. Frodo slept unquietly, turning and tossing, and sometimes murmuring. Twice Sam thought he heard him speaking Gandalf's name. At the start of The Two Towers, after the opening sequence, we have Frodo awakening by shouting Gandalf. So it sort of builds off that and shows how they altered things. We also see Frodo clawing at his neck as he sits there. In the book, they explain that the ring gets heavier with every step towards Mordor. Come the end of the film, we'll see his neck has these giant marks in it where the chain was. This highlights the true weight of it, and it all builds off from this moment here. Now Gollum comes back and wakes him up, and they talk about the days getting shorter. Yeah, it's called winter, mate.
The days are growing darker.
Haven't you had any sleep, Mr. Frodo? He said. What's the time? Seems to be getting late. No, it isn't, said Frodo, but the day is getting darker instead of lighter. darker and darker. As far as I can tell, it isn't midday yet, and you've only slept for about 3 hours. In the book, the group then reached the crossroads, which I'll not go into. Looking out through a parting in the trees, they see Osgiliath off in the distance. Covered in shade, this is symbolic of Mordor's reach taking hold of it. It's also something they apply in the film when we get a wide shot of the city. Orcs are weaker in the sunlight, and thus it aids them if they're covered in shade. Smoke litters the sky, and Mount Doom constantly pumps out ash to provide them with cover. The book also has them spotting one of the Argonath, which is something we see later on in the film. Describing how the years had gnawed at it, it's also a metaphor for how the line has fallen. Aragorn will revive this, and it's an important monument to find in the wasteland. The chapter then ends perfectly and ushers in an age of darkness. They cannot conquer forever, said Frodo, and then suddenly the brief glimpse was gone. The sun dipped and vanished, and as if at the stuttering of a lamp, black night fell. In this opening, we also get a focus on Sam's hope. Rather than just eating the lambus bread willy-nilly, he's rationing it out. This is so they have enough for the trip home, and it highlights how the characters are viewing the situation. Later on, Gollum also ends up using the bread to manipulate Frodo. Wasting it, he pretends Sam's been eating it instead of keeping it safe. We then see as the pair walk through the leafless and withered trees. This was actually caused by the volcano Ruapiu the year before. That had erupted and destroyed the shrubbery, and thus it gave this bleak and dying look to the land. This video is sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus is an exciting turn-based tactical strategy game set in the eternal conflict of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. In Tacticus, you bring some of the universe's most powerful warriors to lightning-fast tactical skirmishes, where you are in full control and only superior tactics can deliver victory. The game features tactical, fast-paced battlefield gameplay, and you can do it all from the palm of your hand. It allows you to assemble and lead over 70 champions from 17 playable factions. Now, the game launched back in August 2022, but since then, it's become a pillar of the community. Officially licensed by Games Workshop, it's perfect for grizzled fans of the universe, but also welcoming to new ones. You and other passionate fans can build a friendship while fighting against other players in high-stakes battles. This includes PvE campaigns, PvP, live events, guild raids, and a lot more. Just in time for Christmas, they've also launched a brand new element, that is the famous Red Gobbo, who appears just in time for Grotmas. Go and download the game now to get playing today. If you click my link in the description and use the code HAPPYDECK, you'll also get 2k gold and 50 Blackstone. Available until the 1st of January, make sure you don't miss out by clicking the link in the description now. Just use the code HAPPYDECK to get 2k gold and 50 Blackstone and get playing now. Thanks. Now from here we travel to Isengard, which vastly alters depending on the version. As always, we're covering the extended ones, and yay, 4 hours and 23 minutes long. In this though, we get a scene with Saruman which vastly alters the character's arc. In the book, he ends up taking the Shire and becomes the final boss the hobbits have to face. Personally, I think ending with the destruction of the ring works better, as that's what the trilogy's about. Still though, Saruman's death was cut out the theatrical, which Christopher Lee was really annoyed at. It makes it seem like Saruman just went into his tower at the end of the last one, and that he was never seen again. Jackson revealed that in the editing bay, they realised the Isengard scene slowed the pacing. However, they couldn't remove all of it, as this is where they get Merry and Pippin from. Unfortunately, he had to sacrifice Lee's death, and Lee was obviously a bit annoyed about it. The pair fell out, but then made amends, and eventually Lee starred in The Hobbit. However, he said to him at the premiere jokingly, "Are my scenes still in it?" Still though, the extended editions restored it, all 4 hours and 23 minutes of it. Kill me! We will of course be covering the chapter where Saruman takes the Shire, but for this section we're still in the Two Towers. This is chapter 8, which is titled The Road to Isengard.
To Isengard!
It's very much the quiet after the storm, with Gandalf leading them to Orthanc. The book tells us no orcs survived Helm's Deep, and the men were captured and put to work. Helping to rebuild Isengard, they then travel there and see the hobbits at the entrance, who discover they're smoking weed, which in the book tells us is the Shire's 1417 crop. Amid all the wreck of Isengard, this seemed to them the strangest sight. But before the king could speak, a small smoke-breathing figure became suddenly aware of them. As they sat there silent on the edge of the mist, he sprang to his feet. A young man he looked, or like one, though not much more than half a man in height. His head of brown, curling hair was uncovered, but he was clad in a travel-stained cloak of the same hue and shape as the companions of Gandalf had worn when they rode to Edoras. He bowed very low, putting his hand upon his breast. Then, seeming not to observe the wizard and his friends, he turned to Éomer and the king. "Welcome, my lords, to Isengard. We of course get this in the movie, and the film plays upon this bit in the book. We are the door wardens. Meriadoc, son of Saradoc, is my name, and my companion who, alas, is overcome with weariness. Here he gave the other a dig with his foot. Is Peregrine, son of Paladin, of the House of Tuck. Now it's here that we see Treebeard's taking charge, and get the line,
Young Master Gandalf.
Gandalf's thousands of years old, so it highlights how old Treebeard must be if he's calling him young. Now the work says the water has come in and washed away the filth, and the men are now able to rebuild. Retroactively, this chapter tells the battle with Isengard, and it's about Merry and Pippin filling them in. Now they then go and bang on the doors of Isengard, but initially there's no answer.
Go away!
It's also important to know that in the work, Wormtongue arrives after it's already taken. When he came out of the mist and suddenly saw all the ruin and wreckage in front of him, he sat and gaped, and his face went almost green. He was so bewildered that he did not seem to notice us at first. When he did, he gave a cry, and tried to turn his horse round and ride off, but Treebeard took 3 strides, put out a long arm, and lifted him out of the saddle. He then let him go, but since then the pair have been behind the doors of the tower. Now from here, the movie then takes us to chapter 10, which is called The Voice of Saruman. Gandalf rightly worries that the villain's like a wild beast, backed into a corner and that he might attack. Banging on the doors, it's Grima who then answers. Telling him to go and fetch his master, Saruman appears at the top of the tower. Described as a liar with honey on his forked tongue, he tries to form an alliance under the pretense of averting future deaths. You are a liar, Saruman, and a corrupter of men's hearts. You hold out your hand to me, and I perceive only a finger of the claw of Mordor, cruel and cold. Trying to appeal to Gandalf, he talks of the ancient order they're a part of, and tries to get him to come in and commune. Theoden worries he'll go in and close the door and then lock them out. Gandalf instead offers that he comes down, but Saruman sees it as being like a housekeeper greeting the robbers at his door. In this refusal in the book, Gandalf reveals himself as Gandalf the White. Casting him out of the council, he then breaks his staff. There was a crack, and the staff split asunder in Saruman's hand, and the head of it fell down at Gandalf's feet. Go, said Gandalf. With a cry, Saruman fell back and crawled away. At that moment, a heavy shining thing came hurtling down from above. This is when the Palantir falls, which is what Pippin finds in the water. In the film, though, they do that, and then of course have Saruman's death. Stabbed in the back by Wormtongue, this is something the character does in the chapter The Scouring of the Shire. Again, it kind of plays into the idea that every character has their own little part to play. In the work, they talked about executing Wormtongue at Rohan, but in the end he was spared. He of course had his own part to play, which also reflects the fate of Gollum. Saruman says that he has some secret info for them, but we don't learn what this is.
You withdraw your guard, and I will tell you where your doom will be decided.
We of course know this would be Minas Tirith, but the behind the scenes stuff said he'd also talk about Denethor. Saruman would say he'd fail them, but he doesn't get to say it. Slapping Wormtongue and slagging off Rohan, this then breaks the traitor who stabs him in the back. In what's one of the most messed up bits of trivia I've ever read, Lee said the gasp of death he made was something he took from real life. Saying he saw people stabbed in the back on the battlefield, he used his memory to influence his performance. Grima is then shot by Legolas, which mirrors his fate in the book. There though, he's killed by hobbit arrows, which we'll go into more on later on, which don't go away, mate. I know the runtime of the video, it's putting you off, yeah?
Oh my goodness!
But watch along until the end and hit the thumbs up while you're there. In the work, Legolas then talks to Treebeard and they discuss visiting Fangorn. This will be alongside Gimli, but it worries Treebeard because he has an axe. Gimli says it's for orc necks, which Treebeard absolutely loves. He says that's a better story, and we end with the gang leaving. Treebeard then promises to guard the tower, which bro had one job. Anyway, in the film, we then return to Edoras. Shoutouts to Eric Voss for pointing out that this establishing shot is actually reversed, which you can see by the clothes and the flags. Originally, they had soldiers walking about as well, but they all got digitally removed. This was to hide they were walking backwards, and you can't really tell unless you look closely at the flags. Theoden then toasts,
Hail the victorious dead!
And this somewhat foreshadows the dead being used to get victory. Cutting to a drinking game at the Golden Hall, we then get 2 cameos behind Legolas. To the far left, we have composer Howard Shore. He's joined by sound designer Michael Semenuk. In what's a great little reference to Jaws, we then get Gimli saying this.
It's the dwarves that go swimming with little hairy women.
Which John Rhys Davies improvised to call back to this.
Here's to swimming with bow-legged women.
Gimli gets completely wasted, and I love how later on the Palantir scene, you can see him passed out from the drinking game while everyone's up on their feet panicking about what's going on. Dancing on the tables, we then see Merry and Pippin performing the same song they did at the Green Dragon in Fellowship. At Isengard, they reminisced over the inn, but it shows that home is where the heart is. However, there is a tinge of sadness to this, as the two other hobbits are still out there. What I love about the interaction with Gandalf and Aragorn, though, is that they talk about how they're holding on to hope. Even in the end, they don't know if Frodo is still alive, but they do what they can to cause a distraction. We also have him keeping a close eye on Pippin because of the Palantir. At Orthanc, he looked at him when he picked it up, and knows from Fellowship he's a
Fool of a took.
The Palantir sort of becomes like its own ring, and we see as Pippin's tempted by the power. Ultimately, it's just like what the characters go through with the ring, and he's unable to control it. It plays really well with the addiction themes and how everyone has a side that's unable to resist temptation.
This is your brain. This is what happens to your brain after snorting heroin. This is what your family goes through.
That marries it perfectly with the scene that we cut to next. Here we catch Gollum talking to his reflection in a lake. It's a creative way to play out the two sides, with the prior movie using editorial techniques to portray it. I did find it more creative there, but here it's done for a specific reason. Gollum drops a stone in the water, and after it clears, we see Sam's behind him. So it's a great way to have a little, I'm not going to say jump scare, but a character appearing, mentioning, I thought that sounds nothing like me. This is obviously Shelob. It's something he talks about a lot in the Two Towers book, with the scene with her actually happening there. That culminates with Frodo being captured, which is how the book ends. It leaves it on a cliffhanger, but I do like the structure they do here. We obviously know Gollum's plotting something, so the tension comes from seeing who Frodo will trust. It just works better keeping it confined to one film, though they did kinda tease it last time. What I also love is that Smeagol says,
Take it for me.
it shows that Smeagol's so selfish he'll steal it from his split personality. It leads to Sam trying to throttle him, which causes fractures in the group. Sam also calls him a villain, which is something he repeatedly referred to him in the work as. Back at Edoras, we see as both Aragorn and Pippin stir. The former goes in the Great Hall, which is when he chats to the side chick. Eowyn then tells him about her dream, which is her seeing the wave that wiped out Numenor.
I dreamed I saw a great wave.
Dreams are extremely important in the series, and they're a way for characters to gain messages. In the Fellowship book, Frodo saw a vision of Gandalf and Orthanc, and as mentioned, a dream was gonna open the movie. It also taps into Tolkien's real life as well. The author had a recurring dream where he was swallowed by a wave that he then brought across to the books. According to the sources, the dream was of Atlantis, which he then used as a basis for Numenor. Numenor falling almost wiped out Aragorn's line, and it adds the idea of peril to the future. That then takes us to the Palantir chapter from the Two Towers. Rather than having a big party, we build off the back of the voice of Saruman and start to sow the seeds for the future. It opens by explaining how Saruman thinks it's Pippin who's the ring bearer. The forces of evil still believe they're trying to use it as a weapon, which they really build upon in his moments. He had his eyes on you. If it is any comfort to your pride, I should say that, at the moment, you and Pippin are far more in his thoughts than all of the rest of us. Who you are, how you came there and why, what you know, whether you were captured, and if so, how you escaped when all of the orcs perished. It is with those little riddles that the great mind of Saruman is troubled. This then crafts Saruman's hate for hobbits, and it's why he ends up attacking the Shire. Now in the work, Pippin's troubled by the fact a great wizard wants him dead. Unable to sleep, he ends up grabbing the Palantir and looking into it. Driven by some impulse that he did not understand, Pippin walks softly to where Gandalf lay. He looked down at him. The wizard seemed asleep, but with lids not fully closed. There was a glitter of eyes under his long lashes. They bring this across brilliantly to the movie with Gandalf lying there with his eyes open. However, it's a trick to make you think he's awake, and I love that this is how the guy sleeps. In the work, he swaps it with a stone, whereas in the movie they use a jug. Now in the old days, kids, people used to use these beside their beds as a way to pee in them because they didn't have indoor plumbing and toilets in the house. So it's nice of you, Pip, and I hope he didn't spill it getting up. Never mind, it's completely disappeared. The work then tells us that Pippin has instant regret and wants to give it back, but he knows he won't be able to without waking overtaking him. So he says he might as well have a look, and it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him. Now, this chapter also cements how similar the Palantir is to the ring. It allows you to look into another's mind, which is something the ring also does. The word Palantir means that which looks far away, and it highlights how Sauron corrupts. They say he can take anything and make it evil, which is also what he's done with the Seeing Stones. And the work also explains that this is how he subverted Saruman, with curiosity killing the cat. Each Palantir applied to each, but all those in Gondor were ever open to the view of Osgiliath. Now it appears that, as the Rock of Orthanc has withstood the storms of time, so there the Palantir of that tower has remained. But alone it could do nothing but see small images of things far off in days remote. Very useful, no doubt, that was to Saruman. Yet it seemed that he was not content. Further and further abroad he gazed, until he cast his gaze upon Barad-dûr. Then he was caught. Sauron then looked into his mind, which is something he also did with the rings. That's not really touched upon in the movies, but this is why Sauron gave them as gifts. He wanted a way to watch the thoughts of his enemies, and the Palantirs work in the same way. Not fully accounted for, they have the potential to be spies in the heroes' camps. At first the globe was dark, black as jet, with the moonlight gleaming on its surface. Then there came a faint glow and stir in the heart of it, and it held his eyes, so that now he could not look away. Soon all the inside seemed on fire. The ball was spinning, while the lights within were revolving. Suddenly the lights went out. He gave a gasp and struggled, but he remained bent, clasping the ball with both hands. Closer and closer he bent, and then became rigid. His lips moved soundlessly for a while. Gandalf says, "So this is the thief," and tosses his cloak over it, but it's slightly more chill in the book. In the film it comes across a lot more intense than when I initially read it. The book explains what he saw, and that he witnessed a giant tower surrounded by bats, and then he came and questioned him, and then Pippin blacked out.
I saw him.
Now, in a lot of ways, Gandalf in the work, he's glad that Pippin's the one who tested it. Had the wizard done it, then he might have revealed things. The source material says he knows nothing, and thus he can be used as a way to trick the enemy. So this entire plan is about making the bad guys think Pippin's the ring bearer. They already had the suspicion they'd go to Minas Tirith, and this would be to use the ring as a weapon. So all Gandalf's doing is playing into this idea that that's what the plan is. It's the greatest distraction of all time, and it ends their journey in the Two Towers book. So we're finally at Return of the King, with the first chapter being titled Minas Tirith. The movie does alter things slightly, as Pippin saw the tree when touching the stone.
There was a white tree in a courtyard of stone.
Putting Pippin on Shadowfax, we then get one of the best lines in the franchise.
Show us the meaning of haste.
Mary!
This comes from later in the work in the chapter The Houses of Healing. Now there, we then get a section about how Shadowfax doesn't have a harness. We talked about that more in our breakdown of the second film, but the Horse Lord is equipped so anyone can naturally ride it. As they ride out, Merry rushes to the gate and runs past the soldier. Little bit of movie magic made, because obviously the guy still dwarfs him. However, this is Tall Paul, aka Paul Randall. Randall worked as a body double in the film, and often played the taller actors in the scenes with the hobbits. Weird, because I get called Small Paul, but I'm like 6'2", and I don't know why my wife keeps calling me that, but moving on. Now we then get a shot that transitions from a little person into Dominic Monaghan. He's hiding behind the fence as the double runs up, and then he's waiting before popping up his head. So it masks the size difference really well, and creates the smooth, convincing moment from the stairs. You might also notice that Shadowfax runs through the stream, and the Two Towers explains that he always takes the quickest route, even if that means going through water or off a cliff. We then get another play on the idea of dreams as we cut across to Arwen. Here she's going to the west to retire and live in Elf, Florida. However, she's given pause by a vision of her child, who then runs up to his dad. I love how they make Aragorn look older here, and it shows the life she's walking away from. It's in this that we also get a cameo by Brett McKenzie. Known from Flight of the Conchords, he originally appeared as a background character in Fellowship. Fans noticed him though and nicknamed him Figwit, and then Jackson brought him back for the insert shots here. He then returned for The Hobbit, so he's a nice returning character in the franchise. Figwit also stands for Frodo is great, who is that? We then get a scene with Elrond, who says he also saw this child. However, he chose to protect his daughter and send her to Valinor. If she goes though, it will vastly change the future, and it highlights how apathetic some of the elves are. Later on, Gandalf says,
Kings made tombs more splendid than the houses of the living.
which is of course referencing the men as well. It highlights how we often focus far too much on the past and living up to that ideal. We must look to the future though, as that's where things strive. People like Theoden, Denethor, they're all people who initially sat back and almost allowed things to be destroyed. Whereas Gandalf managed to shake Theoden free, Denethor does the opposite. He ends up wanting to burn his son and thus he'll destroy his line. There is no future in doing that, which also reflects Elrond's folly here. Owen then ends up staying, but hope falls when she reads a book. In this we can see for a split second the path of the dead. Her dropping this is because the light of the Eldar is leaving her and thus she will eventually die. It's in this that we also get a scene that was taken from the Fellowship book, in that Aragorn's sword was reforged into Anduril. Going back, I think I made the mistake in the breakdown for the first film, as I remember taking the book as being gospel. There we learned Narsil was reforged into this new sword after the council. Here they reordered it though, and apologies for messing that bit up, I just incorrectly filled in the blanks with them not showing it in the movie. Now it also bears a new inscription that says how Anduril's the son of Narsil. Thematically it ties into the idea that Aragorn's descended from a line of broken kings and is reforging them into something great. That then takes us to Minas Tirith, which we first saw during Fellowship. In the book they had a bit more action here as Gandalf and Pippin were stalked by the Nazgul. Here though, they just touch upon it for fans of the book.
3 days' ride as the Nazgul flies, and you better hope we don't have one of those on our tail.
After looking at the Palantir, Pippin heard a cry overhead, and then as they rode out, it flew swiftly after them. This explained why it was near Osgiliath, and it would keep trying to grab Pippin from the city. Now, another thing they alter from the work is that when they were riding out, they saw the beacons of Gondor were already lit. This is something Pippin has to do in the movie, so he becomes a bit more of an active character. The line about the beacons of Gondor being lit, that comes directly from the work, but I prefer how they did it in the film. Large portions of this set were built for real in a quarry, and it adds a sense of realism and scale to the film. Nowadays, you'd probably just use the volume or something, but it helps to add authenticity to the movies. We also see its ring-like structure, with this being inspired by Siena in Italy. And upon its outthrust knee was the guarded city, with its 7 walls of stone so strong and old that it seemed to have been not builded but carven by giants out of the bones of the earth. They also looked at the gate engravings in Florence to craft the ones we see in the movie. Entering here, the work tells us that Gandalf uses the name Mithrandir as a password. This is what he's known as in Gondor, and it was also used as a password in Rohan. However, the gods are suspicious of Pippin. To earn their trust, they bring up that Boromir was their friend and that the news of the Fellowship should have been told to his dad. Denethor though, he's already aware, which is the first tip off something suspicious about him. We then see as they ride through the city and get a look at the Citadel. In the work, there's no horses allowed and it's extremely strict. It also describes the guards' armor, which Jackson based on the battle from the prologue. In the work, we discover their heirlooms from the glory days of old and that the armor is made from the finest mithril. Not everyone's happy to see Gandalf though, and it's a carryover from Rohan. In the Two Towers breakdown, we talked about how he was nicknamed Stormcrow as he only showed up before something bad was going down. So yeah, it feels like when my video is doing well and then Ryan Airy shows up on the subscription feed and steals all the views.
Shut the f*** up, Ryan Airy!
Arriving at the top tier, we then see the tree. A sweet fountain played there in the morning sun, and a sword of bright green lay about it, but in the midst, drooping over the pool, stood a dead tree, and the falling drops dripped sadly from its barren and broken branches back into the clear water. Pippin glanced at it as he hurried after Gandalf. It looked mournful, he thought, and he wondered why the dead tree was left in this place where everything else was well tended. Jackson really wanted to flesh out its backstory, but they ran out of time in a nearly 5-hour-long movie. In case you don't know, this tree's descended from Nimloth and Numenor. Long story short, but that tree descended from Talperion, and it carried the notion of rebuilding the line. In chapter 17, the tree sheds a new seed after the darkness is vanquished. This represents the dawn of a new age, and it's symbolic of how things are regrowing. The tree flourished when men were at their best, but it's withered and rotting now Denethor's leading. Now, like the film, in the book, right, Denethor, he starts off pretty chill, but over time he goes a bit crazy. I think John Noble absolutely kills it though, and he'd pretty much play the same role in The Boys. However, John Rhys-Davies, he actually auditioned for Denethor, but he was so good they said, let's give him Gimli. And Treebeard as well. In the lead up to entering the throne room, we then get this exchange.
In fact, it's better if you don't speak at all, Peregrine.
The book fleshes this out a lot more though and explains why Denethor will question him. He knows Gandalf won't give any answers and thus it's easier to get them from Pippin. That's why he ends up accepting his service, because it's a play to unearth the truth. Therefore Pippin can't mention anything of Aragorn as he might see him as trying to oust him. Gandalf warns that Denethor loved his son and that he utters loved him too much, which is something we see. Boromir's like, I met a halfling, father. Denethor's like, Boromir would have met a holeling. We do learn a lot more of their relationship in the text though, where Gandalf goes over the two sons. He says that Denethor is wise and kind, which is something we don't really get in the movie. However, Gandalf also states that the wisdom passed to Faramir, whereas Boromir just got the ambition. That ambition has him saying he doesn't accept Aragorn as his replacement, and we're getting a bit ambitious for a steward there, mate. Anyway, they enter the room and Pippin's then reminded of the Argonath and describes it as an avenue of kings long dead. However, he notices the throne is empty. It's in this that they meet Denethor for the first time and see him holding Boromir's horn. It's slightly different in the film, as there it's kind of played as a gotcha moment. The work has it more like he's grieving his son. He explains that he heard it blowing 13 days prior, which is when Boromir was defending the hobbits. The book explains he has a Palantir as well, which is how he knows so much. The work definitely fleshes out more of what happened with Boromir and how it was his dad that affected his judgment. Denethor's pressure made him write to Rivendell and somewhat made Boromir more susceptible to the ring's corruption. This pressure made him feel like he had to take it rather than taking it to Mordor to destroy it. As they enter, detail of love can also be seen in the lights above the throne. That in itself is shaped like the crown that Aragorn later gets, which is a brilliant bit of set dressing. Pippin then offers Denethor the ancient and valuable blade he got from the Barrow-wights. Presenting it as a service, he swears himself to the steward. Denethor's first command in the book is for Pippin to tell him what happened to Boromir, and we get a bit more dialogue beyond this scene.
The mightiest man may be slain by one arrow, and Boromir was pierced by many.
However, as they expand the work, Pippin's a bit more grateful. The mightiest man may be slain by one arrow, he said, and Boromir was pierced by many. When last I saw him, he sank beside a tree and plucked a black feathered shaft from his side. Then I swooned and was made captive. I saw him no more, and know no more. But I honour his memory, for he was very valiant. He died to save us, my kinsman Meriadoc and myself, waylaid in the woods by the soldiery of the Dark Lord, and though he fell and failed, my gratitude is nonetheless. In the book, Pippin then stares at Denethor and says how he can see the similarities to Aragorn. They come from a similar line, so do share some characteristics. However, a bit I love is that he says Denethor looks more like a wizard than Gandalf does. He turned his eyes on Gandalf, and now Pippin saw a likeness between the two, and he felt the strain between them, almost as if he saw a line of smouldering fire drawn from eye to eye that might suddenly burst into flame. It's in this that he and Mithrandir go back and forth with Gandalf, urging him to fight. He presents the Staff of Saruman and says this shows they can win. Now it's here in the work that they have the banquet, which is presented later in the film. In the movie, they then look out at Mordor, which is blanketing the sky with ash. We then get a big chapter where we see the ins and outs of Pippin's time as a knight. Exploring the city, we meet Beregond, who wants to learn about the halflings, while Pippin learns about Gondor. All that Pippin really wants to know, though, is about breakfast and mealtimes. He calls all the questions hungry work, and even after the banquet, still wants more food. I also love how when he realises there's going to be a fight, he wants to immediately bail.
Well, Minas Tirith. Very impressive. So where are we off to next?
They also look on Osgiliath far away and drop the line,
It's the deep breath before the plunge.
We also get the brilliant line about him not wanting to be in a battle, but that waiting on the edge of one is even worse. They then discuss the previous siege at Osgiliath, where Boromir held back the forces, which we saw the aftermath of in Two Towers. The book has Beregond saying he knows that Gandalf has come because Tirith is the last stand. If it fails, then all men fall. Beregond was reworked into the character Irolas, who doesn't appear in the book. His name translates to Old Leaf, and he's a representation of the Old God. Gandalf then describes the armies coming together. In this, we get the ships with the captain being a cameo by Peter Jackson. Later on, he's killed, and it marks his third appearance in the trilogy. In the work, they then hear a winged Nazgul above them, and their hearts grow cold. I fear that Minas Tirith shall fall. Night comes. The very warmth of my blood seems stolen away. In the film though, Gandalf describes the Night King and we see him being suited up, which works better in visual storytelling. It also gives the movie a big bad because Sauron doesn't appear in physical form. There were thoughts of having him appear in the final battle though, and they even shot the fight with that in mind. This would begin with a bright light shining forth with Sauron initially arriving as Anatar. He'd then shift and the forces would then charge him. However, they decided to swap it out for a troll, which is what we get in the end. The stabbing in the foot was meant to mimic Fingolfin stabbing Morgoth's foot as he was crushed under it. I don't know if it works as well with a troll, and I would have liked to have seen Sauron, but it kept with the idea that he'd never emerge in the trilogy. You can see the basis for this though when Aragorn picks up the Palantir in the throne room later on. Sauron is shown in his armor holding a Palantir as well, which was done to highlight he was back. We're so back! It would also set up their battle and show how strong-willed Aragorn is. It also doesn't activate until Aragorn looks at it, and it's the two enemies seeing each other for the first time. It also highlights that you have to look at the Palantir before it opens up to you, which is a nice touch. Personally, I would have loved that battle, and I think the Return of the King title could have tied to that as well. However, Jackson felt distracted from the true focus, which was Frodo and Sam. He also saw Tolkien as not putting this fight scene in for a reason. Aragorn is supposed to be sacrificing himself for Frodo and buying him time to destroy the ring. So Clash against Sauron goes against that, and thus they just kept the focus on the Witch King. Early concept art also had the Witch King's helmet similar to Sauron's, but they felt it might get confusing. The Witch King dies at the midpoint, and he's of course killed by Eowyn.
The one they say no living man can kill.
So they just felt people might get confused about why all that was happening with Sauron. The helmet was then redesigned, and I do think it works better as its own thing. Now this is all told to us in the book as Pippin explores Tirith. It's a real ground level view of the conflict that you don't really get from the movies. Pippin also really gets fleshed out here, whereas in the prior books he was always just a side character. He meets Beregond's son Virgil, who's described as his best companion since Merry. They laugh a lot, and it takes Pippin's mind off the conflict. However, there's always the reminder as more soldiers begin to arrive. Amongst these is Forlong the Fat, the Lord of the Lassarnak. He's a big man with a big beard and a big spear that brings a big army. You also have Ringo of the Vale and a vast paragraph describing all the forces. In total, it adds 3,000 men, which shines a ray of hope. However, the chapter ends ominously as we close out with a shadow falling on the city. The darkness has begun. There will be no dawn. Now it's alongside this that Frodo and Sam come across the Argonath statue. Here it's a mirror of the scene in the cornfield from Fellowship, in which Sam said it was the furthest he'd been from home.
I don't think I'll be coming back.
Frodo urged Sam to carry on, whereas here it's Sam who's doing it. However, it also plays upon a big theme in the book that you can never truly go home. This is something lays throughout where there often being lines that reference it. No matter what happens, they'll always be changed for either good or bad. However, there is some hope with the flowers creating a crown for the statue.
Look. The king has got a crown again.
It highlights the line of kings flourishes again, and it's the return of the king.
He said it!
Anyway, at this point, the trio arrive at Minas Morgul. Told to us in the chapter The Stairs of Cirith Ungol, this takes place in the Two Towers book. Upon arriving on the outskirts, Frodo feels a dark force pulling him towards the city. This is something that we see in the film, with the book giving us insight to his mind. He thinks of the ring initially as a comfort, but his mind shifts to just seeing it as a danger. We can also catch the two watchers on the statues which appear later in the book at the tower. They were like great figures seated upon thrones. Each had 3 joined bodies and 3 heads facing outward and inward and across the gateway. The heads had vulture faces, and on their great knees were laid claw-like hands. They seemed to be carved out of huge blocks of stone, immovable, and yet they were aware. Some dreadful spirit of evil vigilance abode in them. They knew an enemy, visible or invisible. None could pass unheeded. They would forbid his entry or his escape. They don't come alive or move in the film, but these statues are very, very creepy. It's something ripped right out of Ghostbusters, and probably the most intimidating statue outside of the angels from Doctor Who. Now throughout the work, they discuss how these great locations used to belong to the men, but as Mordor expanded, it then swallowed them up. This was the sister city to Minas Tirith, with a chapter explaining it more. As he gazed at it, Sam suddenly understood, almost with a shock, that this stronghold had been built to not keep enemies out of Mordor, but to keep them in. It was indeed one of the works of Gondor long ago, an eastern outpost of the defences of Ithilien, made when, after the last alliance, men of the Westerners kept watch on the evil land of Sauron, where his creatures still lurked. But as with Narcost and Carcost, the Towers of the Teeth, so here too the vigilance had failed, and treachery had yielded up the tower to the Lord of the Ringwraiths, and now for long years it had been held by evil things. Since his return to Mordor, Sauron had found it useful, for he had few servants but many slaves of fear, and still, its chief purpose as of old was to prevent escape from Mordor. Now Minas means tower, and Morgul means dark sorcery, which ties in with the name Morgoth. Tirith means watch, so that city is named the Tower of Watch. You can definitely see the similarities between the two cities, but this takes on a much darker design. It's here that Gollum has taken them to the stairs. Described as a narrow path with steps no wider than a ledge, it ascends upwards and disappears into the black. In the book, Mount Doom then shoots more flame into the sky, and Minas Morgul is described as entering. The hobbits hear the Nazgul cry and cover their ears, which is when it rides out. In the book, he's just on horseback, but I think the fell beast makes him even more intimidating. He even has a bit of armor on its head which is a nice touch. As it screams, Frodo clutches at his wound, with it being the Witch King who made that on Weathertop. It's something that plagues him throughout the work, and eventually the pain is a factor in why he heads to Valinor. In the book, the Witch King senses this and stops, and it sort of repeats the tree moment from Fellowship. Either way, it's such an outstanding scene. Like, I don't know if you guys saw this in the theatre, but I remember the score just blasting away during this, and it was like almost an assault on the senses, in a good way. What Jackson does brilliantly with this call and answer is that he also marries this with Gandalf and Pippin. So we get a real sense of the geography of where everyone is. As the terrible cry ended, falling back through a long sickening wail to silence, Frodo slowly raised his head. Across the narrow valley, now almost on a level with his eyes, the walls of the evil city stood, and its cavernous gate, shaped like an open mouth with gleaming teeth, was gaping wide. And out of the gate, an army came. Just everything about this scene looks incredible, and what I loved about the film is that the teams are used to set things up in the story with the others. For example, we had Elrond and Arwen setting up the Path of the Dead with Aragorn. Frodo and Sam's journey shows the army that we're then going to see battle on the fields. Just gives it this cohesive narrative in which every cog is working to spin the greater machine. We then see as Frodo grabs Galadriel's vial to make him forget the pain. From a plot point of view, it's comforting the character instead of the ring, and it makes you remember it before they enter Shelob's lair. I do kind of wish they brought more attention to it in the book, because when that's a series that you could potentially read over the space of a couple of years, you do need things spelled out to you. Hearing Galadriel's words with this works even better, even though I doubt anyone was like, what the heckins is this? Now, another thing they do in the film I prefer is how they handle time here. In the book, they end up sleeping, and when morning comes, they sit around and have breakfast. The gates have closed by that point, and the army's moved on, so just forget about it. However, I love they just start the climb straight away, and we get the army in the background. It gives an idea of how gigantic they are, as the line's still coming out while they're halfway up the stairs. You have that danger behind them, and also the fact the stairs aren't safe either. It's basically them out of the pan and into the fire, which ironically also comes from the Hobbit book. But the stairway was almost as steep as a ladder, and as they climbed up and up, they became more and more aware of the long black fall behind them. And those steps were narrow, spaced unevenly, and often treacherous. They were worn and smooth at the edges, and some were broken, and some cracked, as foot was set upon them. Rising up the cliffside, they then spot an orc at the top of the tower. It's in this they ask Gollum whether the secret path's guarded, and hey, what do you keep laughing and smirking at, mate? Now the group then take a rest in the book, and they rework some parts of the novel for the film. This is where they talk about being remembered in the tales of old, and we get the line where Frodo wants to hear more about Big Brave Sam. A bit I wish though that they included in the film is them saying how Gollum could be remembered. They say he used to be a villain in the story of There and Back Again, but now he's got the chance to be a hero. They go to ask him what he wants to be, but the character's then gone. It's excellent writing for what he really is, and when he returns, something seems off. A strange expression passed over his lean, hungry face. The gleam faded from his eyes, and they went dim and grey, old and tired. A spasm of pain seemed to twist him, and he turned away, peering back towards the pass, shaking his head, as if engaged in some interior debate. Then he came back, and slowly pulling out a trembling hand, very cautiously he touched Frodo's knee. But almost the touch was a caress. For a fleeting moment could one of the sleepers have seen him. They would have thought that he beheld an old weary hobbit shrunken by the years that had carried him far beyond his time, beyond friends and kin, and the fields and streams of youth, an old, starved, pitiable thing. It's such a perfect way to describe the character, and we end with them looking towards the dark path. Now, across at Osgiliath, we see the siege by the orcs, and also get to meet their leader in Gothmog. Named after the Balrog from the Silmarillion, this was one of Morgoth's greatest henchmen. Played by Lawrence Mackor, he played several villains in the series. Guy also did Alerts and Fellowship, and in this film he plays the Witch King as well. Viggo Mortensen joked that he killed this guy about 50 times, and there's points where his characters even have conversations with other characters he's playing. He's just acting against himself. Serkis does the voice of the Witch King though, which I only found out when making this breakdown. As for Gothmog, he's got a much bigger role in the film than he does in the book. Merely mentioned once in the original work, he's simply said to be a lieutenant of Morgul. Jackson and the team decided to make him an orc, and the creative team based his look on John Merrick. That was the Elephant Man, which it's a bit mean that, mate, making him. He'd also looked at the real life figure before though, and actually used him as a basis for his film Bad Taste. Gothmog's someone who was kind of a victim to the theatrical cut, with a lot of his scenes being removed. This included his death scene, so you never really knew what happened to the character. I always just assumed the dead came out and one-shotted him, but the extended edition gives him a full scene. At the location, we also get some great cameos. The stunt coordinator is the guardsman who spots the orcs coming in, and we also have Roy Tolkien as well. Shown in behind the scenes shots, he's the great grandson of Tolkien and can also be seen handing out weapons to the soldiers. According to IMDb trivia, they also had him wear Viggo Mortensen's wig at this point, which no expense spared. Accompanying this is Pippin lighting the beacons, which is another great part of the movie. Love seeing him scaling the side, and then just epic watching a montage of them getting lit along the mountains. I think it's such a great release of tension when you see the first one burn, and then they just light up along the landscape. Like the guys up here, they had one job their whole life, and that was to light the beacon. And they bloody smashed it. Jackson actually filled out the backstory for these figures as well, and said most of them would be father and sons. They'd have been raised as watchers to look out over everything, and tasked daily with making sure the wood was dry. Finally, they get to justify their existence and pass on the message that Gondor calls for aid. Just in the same way that Minas Morgul demonstrated where Frodo and Sam were in relation to everything, this also does the same thing. Aragorn sees them, and we then get a long shot of Viggo just sprinting through Edoras, which is the icing on the cake. There's no need to sprint, but it takes what's been just a vast and expansive scene, almost like an Olympic opening ceremony, and we have the final passing of the torch ending with a sprint. Don't know if that works as a metaphor, but that's what I thought. It represents the hope spreading across the land, and even though Theoden's not wanting to ride for Gondor, this makes him mount up.
Gondor calls for aid, and Rohan will answer.
It's excellent storytelling, and they actually built one of the pyres practically. This was then flown up to the mountainside with a helicopter, and they used this as the basis to CGI the rest. Mounting up, we then get Merry, who mirrors Pippin and pledges his allegiance. I love how when he gets on his horse, his legs aren't even long enough or strong enough to get it to move. No real need to include this shot other than a nice little character moment. Marching out, this all goes down in the passing of the Grey, which is sort of the calm before the storm. However, rather than keeping things dull in the film, they show this alongside Osgiliath. It's the perfect juxtaposition of hope alongside failure. The men make a valiant stand though, and I love how they aid each other. Seeing Faramir run around a corner and then all his mates just firing arrows into his pursuers, it shows Jackson has mastered his craft at this point. After his left hand's killed, the city is lost and the orcs now have a stronghold.
The age of men is over.
Now, the book has the company moving out, though it's not all sunshine and rainbows. In the work, they do it at night and catch a winged shadow moving overhead. Pursued by a rider on the road, the company stops and then ready their swords. Turns out it's just a ranger named Halbarad who's been looking for Aragorn. He's got 30 men with him that want to fight alongside the true king. It's in him that he also inspires the group to seek the dead. I bring you word from my father. The days are short. If thou art in haste, remember the paths of the dead. In the work, it also kind of plays into Frodo and Sam pointing out the days are shorter now. It's all about making the most of it before darkness consumes them, and thematically, it's a nice way to play into the greater threat. This then takes them to Dunharrow, which is where they rest. And what's one of my favourite details in the movie, you can also spot the King of the Dead in the path. The effects they use on the dead also, it works really well, and it's something Jackson also used on the Frighteners. While this is going on, the movie also teases that Eowyn's joining the fight. The book fleshes things out a bit more though and has her volunteering to fight. She even shows up clad as a rider, but Theoden shuts down the idea. In the book, she ends up disguising herself and going under the name Dernhelm. Merry says he recognizes something about the figure, but can't put his finger on it. It's only during the battle with the Witch King she reveals who she is, and this adds some surprise to it.
I am no man.
However, in the movie, when you can see a person, it's difficult to disguise it. So in order to avoid all the characters looking stupid, they just had Mary instantly recognize who she was. They just didn't want to go into Clark Kent territory.
Oh my god! Take those off, you look horrible.
In the book, this night is also the first time that Aragorn and Eowyn speak. She brings him a goblet of mead before wishing them Godspeed. In the movie, this comes after he has a dream of Arwen's death. This reflects her vision of the death of Aragorn last time, so it's a nice way to show how the characters are interlinked.
Interlinked.
The shattering of her necklace is what symbolizes this fall, and this is a symbol of their love. At this point, Elrond arrives with a sword that will allow him to command the dead. There's a much deeper meaning to it though. He was there and witnessed this sword be destroyed, and also how Isildur refused to destroy the ring. He then wanted his people to go into the west because he didn't think there was any hope with men. However, him doing this showcases he actually still believes in them. In the Two Towers, he told Gandalf their age was over, but now he also carries the hope. Now this also has ties to the work. Aragorn's name at Rivendell was Estel, which was the Elvish word for hope. He was the hope that men could return, but they now must put their faith in the path of the dead. Rejecting Eowyn and saying she's in love with a ghost, they then head towards the haunted mountain. In the film, I did wonder if the ghost thing was because he might be joining the ghosts too, and they also don't have the scene with Elrond either. In the book, it's because Aragorn already has his sword, and thus he signals that they should go to the path by saying the following poem. Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward, reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles, to the tombs of kings doom approaches, the dead awaken. The poem's a lot longer in the work, and it basically recounts a legend of these forgotten people and how they seek redemption. But the oath that they broke was to fight against Sauron, and they must fight therefore if they are to fulfill it. For at Erech there stands yet a black stone that was brought. It was said from Númenor by Isildur, and it was set upon a hill. And upon it the kings of the mountains swore allegiances to him in the beginning of the realm of Gondor. But when Sauron returned and grew in might again, Isildur summoned the men of the mountain to fulfill their oath, and they would not, for they had worshipped Sauron in their dark years. Then Isildur said to the king, Thou shalt be the last king, and if the west prove mightier than thy black master, this curse I lay upon thee and thy folk, to rest never until your oath is fulfilled. Again, there's no involvement from Elrond, and it just keeps things confined to the men there, which I actually think is important. Though the book's The Return of the King, it's actually about the return of men. We've waded into apathy, and we're the reason the Dark Force continues. Had Isildur tossed in the ring, everyone would be chilling, probably living like it's Game of Thrones. Lots of twincest.
What are you even saying?
However, this movie is about mankind redeeming itself. This is seen not only in Isildur's heir, but also through the paths of the dead. So these are the perfect characters to have in the film, and when they return, victory is seized. It's the return of the king. Reaching the path of the dead, the book says horses won't pass it. This is something we see, and they flee upon reaching the doorway. That fear is something that's felt with all the characters, and Gimli says his blood runs chill. Halbarad joins them as well, but yeah, I can see why he was cut from the film. Guy's not really needed at all, and they give a lot of his stuff to Éomer. Inside here though, in the work, there's long atmospheric passages as they journey through the caves and chasms. Due to his elven eyes, Legolas spots the dead first, and after this the bells sound and the doors shut. Now while this is going on, Theoden tells Éowyn that he wants her to rule when he's gone. He also forbids Merry from joining them. In the book, they explain that he's too small to ride a horse into battle, and thus one of his men would have to guard him. They're warriors, not babysitters, and he's seen more as a burden than help.
None of my riders can bear you as a burden.
That's why Éowyn scooping him up so important, because she shows she'll keep a close eye on him. However, in the work, we do see that the other soldiers are aware he's with them. They just decide to turn a blind eye. None of them are against someone who wants to fight joining in, and it highlights the brotherhood that comes with soldiers, and sisterhood. Across with Strider and the riders, we then get them inside the cave. I love how Gimli blows away the spirits, and it adds a bit of comedy to a pretty tense scene. Coming across the soldiers of the dead, the king says Aragorn's line was broken, to which he replies,
It has been remade.
This ties in with him not only coming back, but also the reforging of the sword. Aragorn shouts, the hour has come at last, but we don't get a battle with the king in the book. They are, however, allowed to leave, with a theatrical cut just ending the scene, and then they reveal them in the battle. The extended edition has an avalanche of skulls, which I've always thought was such a great visual. I did wonder who these belong to, and it's probably those that entered there without the sword.
None who venture there ever return.
And this skull scene was achieved practically long after the film was completed. Even after Jackson won the Oscar, he still went back to redo this scene for the extended editions. It shows the level of care he put into the film and how important it was to get his vision to screen. The game also had you play the escape and you ran through the caverns as they collapsed around you. I do prefer the way it's handled in the film though, because yeah, it did my head in trying to fight my way out in the game, even though you just said we were mates. What the hell, mate? Heading outside, Aragorn then sees the enemy ships arriving and he falls to the ground feeling like a failure.
Loser!
However, the King of the Dead comes in and it's a deal, mate. Army of the Dead. Anyway, I've been trying to keep the points concise, so something I've skipped over is what's going on with Faramir. Going down in the Siege of Gondor chapter, this is a big bit of the book that unfortunately dragged for me. It's mainly about the soldiers sitting about waiting for the fight and complaining about how bored they are, which yeah, is a weird thing to spend so much time on when you're trying to engage a reader. I do feel writers sometimes go through periods of writer's block where they write this stuff because they don't know where to take it. It's something that's also rampant in Diamonds Are Forever, and it just makes the story drag its feet. Like, why are you telling me it's boring? I'm bored myself. However, we do get the singing bit with Pippin during this chapter. Denethor's esquire has gone to garrison, so he has Pip at his side. Asking him if he can sing, we get an insight into his mind.
I guess I like to sing when I'm doing my chores or whatever.
Pippin's heart sank. He did not relish the idea of singing any song of the Shire to the Lord of Minas Tirith. Certainly not the comic ones that he knew best. They were too, well, rustic for an occasion. He was, however, spared the ordeal for the present. He was not commanded to sing. Gandalf butts in the book, whereas I prefer that Billy Boyd gets to bust out the pipes, which is one of the best songs in the trilogy as well. This came about after a karaoke night where Philippa Boyens fell in love with his voice. So they reworked the chapter and used a song from later in the book. Boyd then got back for the last goodbye in the Hobbit soundtrack, which says a lot because he's not in any of those films. Now in the book, this happens before Faramir returns, however, it's used here dramatically to accompany his death march. Ordered to return to Osgiliath, I think it works better in that context and sets the tone for the scene. In the book, it's just because they're sitting about bored, but the chapter picks up when Faramir returns. Hearing an Nazgul scream, they see them flying out from Osgiliath, which is when Gandalf rides out to them. Amongst these screams, you also get a Wilhelm one. Now, the dark swooping shadows were aware of the newcomer. One wheeled towards him, but it seemed to Pippin that he raised his hand, and from it a shaft of white light stabbed upwards. The Nazgul gave a long wailing cry and swerved away, and with that the four others wavered, and then rising in swift spirals, they passed away eastward, vanishing into the lowering clouds above, and down on the Pelennor it seemed for a while less dark. I love how we follow Gandalf's horse and then pan around to see the city. This was done through the use of a miniature, but the compositioning blends perfectly with the scene. Now in the book, when Pippin sees Faramir, he instantly notices the likeness to Boromir. In return, Faramir notices the halfling, and it's kind of like that bit in Umbrella Academy. They do this really subtly in the film though, as Pip almost can't look back at him. In the work, they then have a meal and Faramir tells them of Frodo. Denethor is pretty chill at first, but this is where the change starts to stir in him. Throughout the story, he starts twitching away and realizes that Faramir could have got the ring. The film simplifies it and just has Faramir given a debriefing. Denethor also slightly plays his hand here.
To be kept safe. Dark and deep in the vaults. Not to be used. Unless...
It's showing that even promising not to use it comes with conditions. It highlights how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that's what corrupts the hearts of men. Isildur wished to use it for good too, and Gandalf touched upon this in Fellowship. He even said that if he had the ring, that's what he'd intend as well, but the ring has a will of its own. For Boromir was loyal to me, and no wizard's pupil.
Boromir was loyal to me! Not some wizard's pupil!
He would have remembered his father's need, and would not have squandered what fortune gave. He would have brought me a mighty gift. Which was an alright impression there. I have to admit myself, give myself a pat on the back. Now he says that Boromir would have seized it, which, would he though? Would he have managed to get it? Faramir says though that even if he did, he would have kept it for his own and would have been unrecognizable when he returned. Denethor then has his outburst, bangs his head, but then begins to smile. I love how this scene's portrayed with Boromir's ghost walking up behind Faramir. It sows the seeds of Denethor's madness, and his reaction's incredible. Always felt like this was based on the madness of King George, and we slowly start to see him go insane. Now in the book, they have a meal and Gandalf gets a bit fidgety and stressed, which is something Pippin picks up on. Obviously, the conversation unravels more of the plan, and he learns what Gandalf's up to. Asking why Frodo was even out there in the first place, it becomes clear the plan's to destroy the ring. So Denethor figures out that everyone in Minas Tirith's life's being put on the line, so Gandalf can buy more time for Frodo. Now, before you cancel me for being like #Denethor was right, I think the book, it helped me to see things from his point of view. He basically had the entire city he rules over put in harm's way, and there's a high chance everyone will die. On top of this, if he survives, then they're gonna come in and usurp him from the throne. On top of this, his favourite son's just died, so he's not really taking it well. This is when he turns in the work, but there he accepts there's nothing he can do. In the movie, he goes out of the city and eventually tells everyone to flee for their lives. There's far more of a council in the book though, and it's after this that Gandalf and Pippin go to rest. It's here that we get the line,
"There never was much hope. Just a fool's hope."
The next day they again call together the council and realise they can't just wait for Rohan. Instead of Baragon, they then have Faramir and Pippin conversing, with the latter wearing the former's childhood clothes. This is something that reflects Merry, who ends up wearing Theoden's old armour from when he was a lad. We then get the whole scene where Faramir says he will go forth, which is ripped right from the pages. However, the actors really bring it to life and exude the sorrow you don't really get in the book. Because of that, it's a real gut punch of a scene. Again, it plays on the idea that men give more attention to the dead than they do the living. Denethor has an amazing son in Faramir, but he's too strung up on how much he loved Boromir. Pippin then officially kisses the ring, which I could have worded that better, but it highlights how people show loyalty through objects like this. Pippin is now bound to the steward, and it reflects the mentality the One Ring puts its bearers under. It's in this though that we get one of the most haunting lines from the work.
"You wish now that our places have been exchanged."
Now it's important to understand that this again highlights how the ring corrupts. In the build-up to this, Gandalf gave the idea that Denethor also loved Faramir. However, the need for power the ring gives overrides all feeling and emotion. It's here that the gods then look out over the city as he rides forth. In this, we get a look at the citizens and another cameo by Jackson and Fran Walsh's children. That's the third time in the trilogy as well, and I like how they just kept having them appear. These films would have obviously taken up a massive part of their lives, so it's nice they could at least have some family moments without leaving work. Now get back to work. I want 3 of the best films of all time. Drop the quality of my Denethor impression there, but we then catch him at one of his banquets, sending his son to die. I love as we see him sloppily gorging on the food. What's in the subtext here that you should pay attention to is the red liquid dripping from the tomatoes. Commanding his son to die, his tongue's laced with the blood of his son. Struck by arrows, we don't see their impact and instead just cut to that dripping from his mouth. It's such a good way to handle it, and it implies so much with doing so little. Now in the book, we actually don't follow Faramir and just get things from the gods' point of view. They see the fight in the distance, and then we get this break in the fleet. Time passed. At length, watchers on the wall could see the retreat of the outcompanies. Small bands of weary and often wounded men came first with little order. Some were running wildly as if pursued. Now who's coming is of course the Nazgul, and with a piercing cry out of the dim sky fell the winged shadows, the Nazgul stooping to the kill. Gandalf rides out again in the book, so it's a bit repetitive of the scene we've just had where he does something similar. So it's not something you want to do so close together in a film, and I can see why they handled it differently. In the movie though, they also ramp up the tension by having the forces of evil at their gate. They send in Faramir's body, and you might notice he has 2 arrows in him. Boromir was killed with 3, and it's a nice way to play off his brother's death to add tension. In the book, they're saved by Gandalf again, and he's brought back by Prince Imrahil. They then take Faramir to the tower and look out over the land. In the work, they then say one of the best weapons of the Dark Tower's dread and despair. That's something you definitely feel here as the Nazgul fly overhead and throw soldiers at the city. In the book, the drums then begin to get louder and louder, and the Witch King rides out on his horse. However, I love that Jackson kept it to the fell beast, and it's a way more intimidating way to depict the peril. Everything is an intimidation tactic, including lobbing severed heads at the city. Boulders are also tossed at it too, and we get one of my favourite miniature shots. Just before this one smashes the structure like the like button, you can catch people standing in the windows. All hope seems lost, and Pippin says he sees Denethor age before him, screaming the wizard offers a fool's hope. It's in the book that Gandalf then takes command.
Abandon your post!
Flee! Flee for your lives!
In the book he says, "Why? Why do you fools fly?" said Denethor. "Better to burn sooner than late, for burn we must. Go back to your bonfire, and I will now go to my pyre. No tomb for Denethor and Faramir. No tomb." Gandalf then says,
Prepare for battle!
and as we see, they fire their catapults back. One really cool detail you might notice here is that the stones are made from parts of the city, so they're literally counter-attacking by hurling the parts back that the enemies destroy. We then get a long take where we follow a gigantic piece of stone hurtling through the air and then hitting the crowd. Eric Voss pointed out how Jackson referred to this as his Pearl Harbor shot, with that movie following a bomb as it hits a ship. It's a great camera technique that takes us from the sky to the ground, and you really feel it as it impacts the orcs. Gothmog also commands them to stay where they are, but even he shifts out the way to avoid being crushed. It's a break in the line and highlights it can be beat. You can also really see how they stepped up these scenes from Helm's Deep, and the battles elevated in every single way. Knowing these movies were also filmed back to back, it really makes you wonder how they designed both scenes. Helm's Deep's obviously a legendary battle, but they must have known when making it that this one had to be bigger. So even though that's still one of the greatest battles ever put to film, they still would have been like, we'll have to top it in the next one. In order to do it differently, they set this fight in the day and added in extra elements that weren't present there. This includes beasts like the trolls and Oliphants, and also the fell beasts that swoop down from the sky. It adds aerial attacks to the battle, and it feels like Spitfires swooping the city. Screaming, we then see as the soldiers grab their ears, and the terror is really elevated. The evil forces charge in, and I love how you can catch a single orc running towards the storage door while the others charge the main gate. The work then has the first ring of the city being burned, with Gron being used to batter the gates. This is what Gothmog brings in, with it being a black steel battering ram that looks like a wolf. Mouth ablaze, this tool's also an intimidation tactic. There's giant beasts that pull it, and orcs mounting the sides, and it just hammers home how much danger they're in. It's also what ends the first disc of the extended editions, and it's a big cliffhanger to close out the Blu-ray. That danger's also shared with Frodo and Sam, who we cut to next. Falling asleep on the cliffside, it's in this that Gollum makes his move. I love how this moment's framed, and visually it calls back to the Two Towers. When Gollum first showed up to get them, he did so by crawling down the cliff. Here, that framework's repeated, and this time he's back to seize the ring. However, he knows that he has to manipulate Frodo, and that it's better to have him cast Sam out. I also love how, whereas at the beginning it was Gollum waking them up, now it's left to Sam. It makes it feel like he's the one letting them down, as they don't know how long they've been asleep for. Frodo even says it's still dark, and he's questioning why he's been woken. Gollum then points out the crumbs on his coat, and it all kind of kicks off with Sam lashing out at Gollum. Sam offers to carry the ring for a bit, which then plays on Frodo's fears. Forcing him out, he then climbs down the cliff, and good luck on your walk home, mate, alone. What Jackson's doing here, though, is taking some creative liberties that I feel improves the story. In the book, Frodo and Sam actually stick together, though they have bits where Frodo snaps at him when he offers to share the load. They always decide in the end that it's better to work together. What it does, though, is build the seeds of Gollum sowing the distrust in order to basically make Frodo as alone as he is.
He wants it. Very soon, he will ask you for it.
In the book, whenever Frodo snaps at him, he always apologizes after. Frodo casts him out though, and he decides to then side with Gollum. He's wandering towards a dark path on his own, both literally and metaphorically. This is all a life with Gollum will lead to, and it will be filled with darkness and despair. So it's smart to have that playing to the film, and it's a trap in more ways than one. Spiders are of course known for laying traps to catch their prey, so it makes sense to tie this in with Gollum, telling him to
go home.
We know deep down that he never really can. Now in the Two Towers book, we're at chapter 20, which is titled Shelob's Lair. Watching Frodo wandering alone, it's infinitely more terrifying than if he'd gone through with someone else. According to IMDb Trivia, Jackson's arachnophobic, which he leaned into when putting together the scenes. Jackson shoots things from Shelob's point of view, so we get long lingering shots with Frodo down the tunnels. This technique was of course used on Jaws, and it lets us sit in the mind of a monster. The team at Weta had added pressure though, as Harry Potter had also put a giant spider to film. Watching the making of, they discuss how they were blown away by that effect and put extra work into this one. I love that film as well, and I think what both do brilliantly is capture the build up towards it. The spider's made scarier because of the dark and dank environment in the lead up to it. The book teases something big's coming and says the filth's unnameable. It's a hostile place that's filled with pitfalls and basically the nest of a xenomorph. Drawing a deep breath, they passed inside. In a few steps, they were in utter and impenetrable dark. Not since the lightless passages of Moria had Frodo or Sam known such darkness, and if possible, here it was deeper and denser. There were airs moving, and echoes, and a sense of space. Here, the air was still, stagnant, heavy, and sound felt dead. They walked as it were in a black vapor wrought of veritable darkness itself that, as it was breathed, brought blindness not only to the eyes but to the mind, so that even the memory of colours and of forms and of any light faded out of thought. Night always had been, and always would be, and night was all. So not a happy fate, and Gollum then disappears, and though they croak after him, there's no stirs within the air. In the film, we see as Sam discovers the breadcrumbs and he realises he has to go back. With Frodo, we see as he remembers Galadriel's word and he then pulls out the file. In the book though, he initially draws Sting. It's in this that he realises Shelob's weakness is light due to the silver edges flickering blue. This of course foreshadows the orcs in the area, but it also causes Shelob to stagger back. Thus they draw the file which blinds it. It's easier just combining these moments and it allows him to reveal the creature as he pulls it out. Voss also pointed out how the spider unfurls from the corner behind Frodo, which is also how the xenomorphs announce their arrival in James Cameron's classic. In the book the pair then run, but they get stuck in the cobwebs. A detail I love that Tolkien added is that Sam's sword can't cut through. Sting can because it's elvish and it highlights a difference in materials. Described as being like a scythe through grass, it buys them a little bit of extra time. However, upon getting out of the caverns, they're able to see Shelob in its true form. There age-long she had dwelt, an evil thing in spider form, even such as once of old had lived in the land of the elves in the west that is now under the sea. Such as Beren fought in the mountains of Terra and Doriath, and so came Luthien upon the green sword amid the hemlocks in the moonlight long ago. How Shelob came there flying from Rhûn, no tales tell, for out of the dark years few tales have come, but still she was there, who was there before Sauron and before the first stone of Barad-dûr, and she served none but herself, drinking the blood of elves and men, bloated and grown fat, with endless brooding on her feasts, weaving webs of shadow, for all living things were her food, and her vomit darkness. Said to be Shelob the Great, the last child of Ungoliant, she's seen as a curse upon an unhappy world. Based on the New Zealand funnel web spider, this is something that scared Jackson as a kid. According to IMDb trivia, they created her cry from a number of different elements. This included the sounds of a plastic alien toy, steam hisses, and the shriek of a Tasmanian devil. Howard Shore was also tasked with thinking outside the box for his score. Jackson told him to go off and make a piece akin to David Cronenberg's The Fly, and you definitely get that feeling of horror. Now in this talk of her backstory, we also learn about Gollum crossing her path. Playing up how pathetic he was, he'd promised to bring her food. What Gollum knows though is that she doesn't care for rings or jewellery. She throws away the bones and empty garments. We shall find it, we shall get it. The precious, a reward for poor Smeagol who brings nice food. We also discover why the forces of Sauron haven't gone and killed her, and this is because she benefits the Dark Lord. And as for Sauron, he knew where she lurked. It pleased him that she should dwell there hungry, but unabated in malice, and more sure watch upon that ancient path into his land than any other that his skill could have devised. And orcs, they were useful slaves, but he had them in plenty. If now and again Shelob caught them to stay her appetite, she was welcome. He could spare them, and sometimes as man may cast a dainty to his cat he calls her, but she owns him not, Sauron would send her prisoners that he had no better uses for. He would have them driven to her hole, and report brought back to him of the play she made. So they both lived, delighting in their own devices, and feared no assault, nor wrath, nor any end of their wickedness. Never yet had any fly escaped from Shelob's web, and the greater now was her rage and hunger. Now with Sam being there in the book, they have to rework how Frodo gets stung. Gollum ends up grabbing Frodo, and Sam leaps up to get him. The pair then fight while Frodo's left on his own. We even get things from Gollum's perspective, with him furious that everything's going wrong. In his rage, Sam draws his sword and goes after him, but this leaves Frodo vulnerable. In the film, they handle things differently, and have Frodo come across Gollum.
I have to destroy it, Smeagol.
I love how Gollum's kind of like accepting that it's not good for them, but he's of course an addict. Thus he ends up attacking him, and Frodo throws him over a cliff, which first time watching I was like, oh, he's dead. Passing out though, he gets a vision of Galadriel, with her again leading him out of the darkness. This again is building off the file and how all the elves combat darkness. I'll touch upon the scenes in between in a bit, but we later catch Frodo moving through the caves. Jackson based the shot of Shelob over his shoulder off a painting of the creature by Alan Lee. In order to pull off the scene, Elijah Wood was stabbed with a prop stinger, and he then bit into 2 Alka-Seltzers. These foamed up and then leaked out of the sides of his mouth. Wrapped in the webbing, Woods described this as being the world's biggest condom, which wouldn't be the first time Woods been in a condom. Never mind. Sam then approaches and we get a shot of his hand with the file. This was actually Jackson holding it, as it was an insert shot they didn't have asked him for. That then takes us to the final chapter of the Two Towers book, over 2 hours and 30 minutes into Return of the King. Finding Frodo due to his gleaming blade on the ground, he sees he's cold and lifeless. The movie paints out things differently, and Sam discovers him after beating the beast. In the book he sees the file, grabs it, and then Shelob appears. This chapter really paints him out as a hero, and he gives Shelob something she hasn't felt in aeons: fear. Fleeing down into a dark abyss, Sam finally has vanquished the threat. However, it's in this his attention turns back to Frodo. Feeling no flutter of a heartbeat, the book really convinces you the character's dead. And then black despair came down on him, and Sam bowed to the ground and drew his grey hood over his head, and night came into his heart, and he knew no more. It's said time drags for him, and he has no idea whether it's been minutes or hours. In the work, he thinks back to a vision of this, with it being something he saw in Galadriel's mirror. Seeing him asleep under a great dark cliff, he realised now the character might have been dead. It's in this that he takes Sting and vows to push on. Holding Frodo's hand for what he thinks will be the last time, he vows that vengeance and anger will push him to the end. This was actually the scene that Sean Astin auditioned with, and you can see why the casting was based upon this moment. It even crosses his mind he might be the last of the Fellowship alive, and one more time tries to awaken Frodo. When his expression doesn't change, it cements to him he's dead. Wood said he could stare for an ungodly amount of time without blinking, so they just had the actor doing this. And then he bent his own neck and put the chain upon it, and at once his head was bowed to the ground with the weight of the ring, as if a great stone had been strung on him. But slowly, as if the weight became less, or new strength grew in him, he raised his head, and then with a great effort got to his feet, and found that he could walk and bear his burden. Now in the book, Sam hears the orcs and he puts on the ring. With film being a visual medium, they have the sword glow to indicate they're coming. Sam simply hides away, whereas in the book he has to go invisible. In the film, they played up a lot more that when wearing the ring, the eye's going to be instantly drawn to you. This is something that was seen from the Offen Fellowship, but that's not necessarily the case in the work. It's nowhere near as immediate, and it takes time for the eye to search for you. Thus, you can move undetected, and it's not like basically just stand up going, look, here I am, here I am. In Sam doing this though, we also get a deeper description of how the world alters around him. The world changed, and a single moment of time was filled with an hour of thought. At once he was aware that hearing was sharpened while sight was dimmed, but otherwise then in Shelob's lair. All things about him now were not dark but vague, while he himself was there in a grey hazy world, alone. Like a small black solid rock, and the ring weighing down his left hand was like an orb of hot gold. He did not feel invisible at all, but horribly and uniquely visible, and he knew that somewhere an eye was searching for him. Thus he's able to spy on the orcs, and we get another feature of the ring. This works basically like Google Translate, and all of a sudden he can understand them. Called Gorbag and Shagrat. That last one's the nickname I had in my 20s. Awooah! The pair then talk of Gollum, and I've come down because he was spotted, describing him as a little black frog. It's at this point they come across Frodo. They assume he's been assisted by a great elven warrior, as nothing has ever kept Shelob from her food. It's pretty funny, and throughout they keep bringing up how there's this powerful warrior in the land. Sam smiles at the description too, but it's in this he learns Frodo's still alive.
She jabs him with her stinger, and he goes as limp as a boned fish.
The Two Towers book then ends with Sam racing to catch up with them, but he fails in reaching the gate. It closes, and though Frodo's alive, the enemy now has him. So it's very much your second part of a trilogy where a villain gets a beloved character. Exact same thing happens in The Empire Strikes Back, which was The Empire Strikes Back of Star Wars. Now while this is going on, we have Pippin seeing Denethor carrying out Faramir. In the film, we see the tree begins to blossom again, and it symbolizes how close we are to the king returning. It's a very short chapter in the book that begins with Pippin hearing the horns of Rohan. This lifts the weight off his shoulders, and it inspires him to push forth and save Faramir. And never in after years could he hear a horn blown in the distance without tears starting in his eyes. Now the reason he's up here is because all those who wear black and silver have to remain at the Citadel. Pippin says he's been given leave, and he then goes to get Gandalf. In the film though, they have him trying to dismantle the pyre. They do a brilliant switcheroo technique here when Denethor tosses out Pippin. Using his double, that's who's Jazzy Jeffed out of there, and then Billy Boyd sticks his head up at the camera. Really smooth motion, and a great way to keep the size of the hobbits confined to one shot. It's in this that he then rushes to Gandalf, and we get one of my favourite moments in the trilogy. I just love the way the Night King swoops in on the fell beast. In the work, they have him arrive on horseback, but it's not as impactful. Instantly, it changes the tone of the scene, grabs your attention while stopping the characters dead in their tracks. He then destroys Gandalf's staff, and it elevates him as a threat that you don't want to mess with. It's in this moment that Jackson has the riders arrive, which is way better than just hearing the horns. I love how they bring sunlight with them, and you can see it clashing against the dark clouds. It echoes the end of Two Towers, but is much larger in scale. That takes us into the chapter The Battle of Pelennor Fields. Opening with the Witch King's attention being drawn away, the forces gather a mile from the battle. We see as Theoden rides along, touching the spears of the soldiers, which according to the making of was Bernard Hill's idea. It's epic, I want to fight, and also like the video. According to the wiki, this charge had to be filmed 52 times due to them wanting the ride to look perfect. However, there is a little gaff. There's a rider that falls off and gets dragged along by his horse. They had a real safety issue with this and struggled to stop the horse. He narrowly missed getting stamped on the horse behind him, but they kept the shot in because it just adds to the frantic feel of the battle. We then cut to Denethor pouring fuel over himself. Noble looks ecstatic doing it, but Gandalf arrives to save Faramir. In the film, Denethor thinks his son's dead, and this is why he's been sent into such despair. It neatly builds off the back of Sam's scene with Frodo, who also thought the character was dead. Both lost something and didn't want to go on. With Sam, it showed how loyal he was to his friend, and that he even would have followed him to death. However, Sam uses this for his own strength, whereas Denethor descends into darkness. Both of the characters, of course, really still alive, but Denethor dies due to misconception, whereas Sam pushes on. In the work, it's made even more treacherous, as Denethor orders his guards to fire on Gandalf. But Gandalf sprang up the steps, and the men fell back from him and covered their eyes. For his coming was like the coming of a white light into a dark place, and he came with great anger. Fearing Faramir's dead, he ends up then saving him. In his fever, Faramir calls out for his father, and this is what broke him in the book. In the film, Shadowfax then kicks him to the fire and sets him ablaze. Now this caused a practical problem when filming, as the horse wouldn't go near the fire. So in order to get around this, the crew reflected the fire onto a pane of glass right in front of the camera. It creates a seamless effect, and I don't think you'd notice when watching the scene. Now in the movie, we have a really epic shot where Denethor runs outside on fire. He then sprints over the edge of the Citadel, and hey, should have probably put a barrier there, mate. Goes against health and safety, that. Jackson has since admitted this is a very long distance to run on fire, but it's such a good shot they just had to keep it in. It's in this that we then swoop down over the battle, and it perfectly segues into the other characters. In the book, they take Faramir outside, and Denethor follows them. This is when he reveals he has a Palantir, and that he's seen Aragorn's out there. In his final act, he refuses to yield, but this fire consumes him. Gandalf watches as he holds out the Palantir in the pyre with his hands burning around it, and then he utters the words,
"So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion."
Now in the fields of Pelennor, we have one of the greatest ever battles put to film. The Oliphants arrive, and it leads to the riders on horses against these giant beasts. I think I'd be remiss for not pointing out the clear Star Wars influences, with this being very akin to the Battle of Hoth. We perfectly see things from the riders' perspectives, and it's size and might versus speed and cunning. Éomer managed to take out two in one go by launching a spear at the driver, and Éowyn slashes the legs of one to bring it crashing down. Now before we get one of the biggest deaths in the trilogy, we get Gandalf explaining how death's just a journey we all must take.
The grey rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass.
It's something that comes directly from the book, and these words were transformed into lyrics that were then brought across to Annie Lennox's song Into the West. Notes from this play in this moment, and it returns when they travel out to Valinor. Frodo sees this when going to the Havens, and Gandalf uses his own death and fellowship to comfort the living. In death, there is peace and no longer torment, so it's a pre-setup for the place that Theoden will go to. In the work, his horse is struck with a black dart, and then it falls down to the ground. The great shadow descended like a falling cloud, and behold, it was a winged creature. If bird, then greater than all other birds, and it was naked, and neither quill nor feather did it bear, and its vast pinions were as webs of hide between horned fingers, and it stank. A creature of an older world maybe it was, whose kind lingering in forgotten mountains, cold beneath the moon, outstayed their day, and in hideous eyrie bred this last untimely brood, apt to evil. It's a brilliant passage and a brilliant scene, and in the work we get the line,
"Do not come between the Nazgul and his prey."
The text is a bit more poetic, whereas we get more action in the movie. Theoden has a protector, and though he recognises the voice, he can't quite make out who's in the armour. Described as being Durmhelm, the character then says, "You look upon a woman, Eowyn I am, Aemon's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone, if you be not deathless, for living or dark undead I will smite you if you touch him." It's very long, and you can totally get why they shortened it for the film. The Nazgul is just standing there like, yeah, finish up, and then we'll fight. But yeah, it just makes sense to have it cut down to that one line. The winged creature screamed at her, but the ringwraith made no answer, and was silent, as if in sudden doubt. In the work, it's a much longer fight, with the fell beast jumping to the air and then swooping back down. For a film, you kinda want it to almost act like a punchline. The fell beast is beheaded, and then the wraith grabs Eowyn before taunting her that no man can kill him. It's another obvious nod to Macbeth, with her finally vanquishing him. This actually comes from a vision that Glorfindel had, in which he said he wouldn't fall by the hand of a man. Because of this, people misinterpreted the legend and thought it meant that he couldn't be killed by men. However, it was him predicting that Eowyn would do it, and this is what finally ends him. The effect on it is so good in the film, with his helmet imploding into the black void. One detail I love is that he screams out, and you can actually see an Oliphant turn and run away. Now the fear has been flipped, and it's the good guys that are scaring the baddies. Merry also stabs him as well in the book, and we learn more of the outcome of that in the story. This ends up withering his hand, and it takes a couple of months for him to recover. Eowyn's also badly damaged in the fight as well, and we see this brought across to the movie. Her arm ends up battered and broken, which happens as she's struck by the beast. However, allows her to get in close as the Witch King wants to relish the kill. In the work, he sort of dies like a Jedi, with his clothes crumpling on the floor. Shapeless they lay now on the ground, torn and tumbled, and a cry went up into the shuddering air, and faded to a shrill wailing, passing with the wind. A voiceless body and thin that died, and was swallowed up, and was never heard again in that age of this world. Now in the book, it's Merry that goes to Theoden, whereas in the film it's Eowyn. In the work, Merry apologizes for being unable to save him. However, Theoden says that all is forgiven, and now
I go to my father's.
in the chapter, he says he wants to see Eowyn one last time and doesn't realise she saved him. He dies not knowing she was there, whereas in the film, her name's his last word.
Eowyn.
I feel like it's sort of a nicer passing for him there, getting to see her, whereas in the book, Merry thinks she's dead. Originally when filming this, Miranda Otto had to play the scene against a double, as Hill had finished filming. According to IMDb Trivia, he'd even been given a farewell party and was no longer contracted to work. However, Hill was actually having a holiday in New Zealand, so he came back to shoot the scene. In the book, Merry's torn up by seeing the pair die, and he even forgets about the rest of the battle. Really, she's passed out from the pain in her arm, but like Faramir and Frodo, they think that she's gone. Éomer rides over, and he's absolutely devastated. Not only does he see that Theoden's dead, but he also thinks that Eowyn is too. So he rides out screaming death, which is a line they gave to Theoden in the film. It's at this point the boats arrive, and the Rohirrim think it's all over. It is now, but not for them. Thus came Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elessar, Isildur's heir, out of the paths of the dead, borne upon a wind from the sea to the kingdom of Gondor. And the mirth of the Rohirrim was a torrent of laughter, and a flashing of swords, and the joy and wonder of the city was a music of trumpets and a ringing of bells. But the hosts of Mordor were seized with bewilderment, and a great wizardry it seemed to them that their own ships should be filled with their foes. And a black dark dread fell on them, knowing that the tides of fate had turned against them and their doom was at hand. Now, Jackson was actually pretty outspoken about how he didn't like the idea of the dead saving them. He felt like it was a bit cheap, and it also provided issues with the battle at the end. However, in order to keep fans of the book happy, he decided to leave them in. He knew he could say the oath was fulfilled and then keep the final fight focused on the heroes. I actually really love how it's just this great wave of soldiers, and it's basically like a kill streak reward on Call of Duty. What it represents to me though is redemption, and finally the failed men have stepped up to the fight. They also have some added tension in the movie amongst this as Gothmog crawls over to Eowyn. Then Aragorn and Gimli gang up on him and just kick the crap out of him. Now in the work, it's a great battle that spans pages, and it eventually ends with a song. This recounts the victory, whereas in the film, you want something big and bombastic. We get some of the most memorable scenes from the trilogy at this point, namely Legolas taking down an elephant. I love how it keeps trying to swat him off as if he's a fly, and this also ended up being the largest ever practically built model ever put to film. Ever. Anyway, the ghost's oath is fulfilled and they finally drift away. And thereupon the King of the Dead stood out before the host and broke his spear and cast it down. Then he bowed lower and turned away. And swiftly the whole grey host drew off and vanished like a mist that is driven back by a sudden wind. And it seemed to me that I awoke from a dream. Now from here, the extended edition takes us into the Houses of the Healing. This is chapter 8 of the book that's all about, well, healing. It's something you don't really need in a movie. For the film though, they shot it anyway and composed a song for the scene which carried the same name as the chapter. Sung by Liv Tyler, this was then reworked into Arwen's song. Tyler, of course, is the daughter of famous singer Steve Tyler, and I'm glad they included it because I don't want to miss a thing in these extended editions. In the quest to be thorough, I'll go through the chapter though, as I think it might enrich in your love for the work. A disease known as the Black Shadow spreads throughout the wounded, and these are all victims of the Night King. It's something that's basically corrupting their bodies. It turns out that this is the same thing Frodo was inflicted with, but Elrond managed to heal him. In Minas Tirith, they don't have anything like that, so the people start dying. Aragorn comes in, and knowing of Elrond's work, he helps heal the inflicted. Here, we catch him tending to Eowyn and still concealing who he really is. Though he could go in and announce he's the king, he doesn't want to cause division and debate. Requesting King's Foil, this is something he used on Frodo and Fellowship. The issue is, there's none in the kingdom. This is where we get the line how Shadowfax will show the meaning of haste, and they go out to get some. Upon returning, Aragorn bursts into tears as he's so happy they have enough to save them. Faramir then finally wakes up. "My lord, you called me. I come. What does the king command?" "Walk no more in the shadows, but awake," said Aragorn. Aragorn uses his voice to guide him out, and he then tries the same thing on Eowyn. However, he realizes that her brother means more to her than he does because she actually has love for him. It's in this, I think, she comes to the realization that she only really loved Aragorn because he was the one guy in Rohan who wasn't a relative or Wormtongue. Sorry, Wormtongue. Aragorn then wakes up Merry, and the first thing he says is he's hungry. In the film, they have Pippin looking for the character, which originally took place in the day. They wanted to add weight to how long Pippin was searching for him though, so they digitally altered it to night. Aragorn then goes through the house healing people, and there's whispers that the king's returned. The return of the king, you could say. Now from here we cut to Sam on his rescue mission. We see things from Shagrat's perspective and catch him fighting over Frodo's shirt. In the book, Sam just arrives to find everyone dead, whereas this works better to fill in what's happening. Shagrat's kicked down a ladder, which is what Sam discovers leads to the chamber in the book. Also, dropkick. Going in the Tower of Cirith Ungol, the book tells us this is happening as Pippin sees the madness in the eyes of Denethor. In the work, we've seen Merry and Pippin be the hero, and now Sam must step up as well. Wearing the ring, he can also hear Shelob bubbling in her pain. However, he takes this off, as he doesn't want to blunder around in the fog that it creates. In removing it though, he instantly feels vulnerable. Thinking he'll get spotted by Sauron, his mind starts to gravitate towards it. However, he realizes it's a trick, and if he relies on it too much, he'll get spotted by the villain. This is when he encounters the Watchers, but he dashes by them holding the file. They scream, and Sam describes it as ringing the doorbell, shouting to tell Shagrat the great elf warriors come. It's here that he finds the courtyard decimated. On the orc corpses, he also sees different markings, with this denoting the two sides. One is marked with a red eye, and the other is a moon, and it helps to differentiate the divide. We even see things from the orc's perspective, for what it saw was not a small frightened hobbit trying to hold a steady sword. It saw a great white silent shape, cloaked in a grey shadow, looming against the wavering light behind. In one hand it held a sword, the very light of which was a bitter pain. The other was clutched at its breast, but held concealed some nameless menace of power and doom. Fleeing them, Sam's then able to move through. In the extended edition, we then catch Gorbag carrying the shirt, which explains how the mouth of Sauron has it later. In the work, we learn that Shagrat throttled Gorbag, but the latter then knifed him in the back. In the film, it's Sam who stabs him. A nice detail you might also notice is that in his death, Sting loses its blue colouring. In the book, when Sam wakes up Frodo initially thinks he's dreaming. He can't believe it at first, and he's distraught the orcs took everything. However, Sam reveals the ring. In the movie, I love how hesitant he is to hand it over, and you can see the characters being tempted. Drawing it in close, Frodo snatches it away, and I love how this builds off the scene with the orcs. We've just seen these kill each other over something shiny, and it somewhat lays the groundwork for this. In the book, Sam even tries to pitch it as something they can share the burden of. He says that it's much heavier now they're in Mordor, and that he can carry it too. Sam had changed before his very eyes into an orc again, leering and pawing at his treasure, a foul little creature with greedy eyes and slobbering mouth. Frodo realizes the ring's changed him, and he begs for forgiveness. He knows Sam's just been through hell to get to him, but the ring makes you completely self-centered. You might also notice on Frodo's chest that there's a ring-like burn, which has likely come from when he slept with it on his chest. Deciding to dress as orcs, they then use Sting to avoid danger and sneak past the Watchers. However, in the book they get caught, and the chapter ends with them sending out a signal. A great shriek then rings out, and a shadow swoops down from the sky. In the next chapter, they just run away and hide though, so it's a bit anticlimactic. Now back with the men, we then hit chapter 9. Titled The Last Debate, it's the morning after the battle. Gimli and Legolas go into the city, and they're happy to see Merry and Pippin. Joking that their march wasn't for nothing, they go on about how the pair will outlast them all. Journeying to the gardens of the house, they talk about what happened when they summoned the dead. They're also like, damn, Aragorn is a really big name these days, huh? It's kind of like that one kid you went to school with who then gets really famous, yeah? Interestingly, right, I actually sat next to Scotty T throughout most of high school because we did classics alphabetically. Taught him my Shagrat ways, you could say, yeah? And shout outs to Scott. I'm sure he's watching this, because if there's one thing I know about the lad, he loves watching 2-hour videos on Return of the King. Either way, they then see Aragorn in a new light and wonder how terrible of a lord he might have become if he took the ring. Bringing together the council, Gandalf then reveals the fate of the ring. Up until this point, it had been kept secret, but he exposes the true plan. However, with this comes the need for action. Bringing up Denethor's final words, he talks about how the Seeing Stone showed him the truth. The stones of the Seeing do not lie, and not even the Lord of Barad-dûr can make them do so. He can, maybe by his will, choose what things shall be seen by weaker minds, or even cause them to mistake the meaning of what they see. Nonetheless, it cannot be doubted that when Denethor saw great forces arrayed against him in Mordor, and more still being gathered, he saw that which truly is. This in the film drives Aragorn to grab the Seeing Stone, and it lures Sauron into a trap. The work explains that from Sauron's point of view, the men clearly have the ring. He studies the signs, the sword that robbed him of his treasure remade, the winds of fortune turning in our favour, and the defeat unlooked for of his first assault, the fall of his great captain. His doubt will be growing, even as we speak here. His eye is now straining towards us, blind almost to all else that is moving. So we must keep it. Therein lies all hope. Knowing that Mordor is still full of his forces, they must get Sauron to empty out his lands. This will give Frodo a clear path and heighten the chance of him destroying the ring. They know he's still likely out there because if Sauron had the ring, they'd know about that by now. The chapter ends with him saying this move will bring an end to the game, and in the end, it ends very ominously. Ooh. Also, I love how in this scene you can see Gimli snag the steward's throne, which great way to get a promotion that. Now at this point we cut to the Palantir scene and have Sauron confronting him. Sauron says, this comes from the Albereth Githlonial poem, and it means white sparkling falling down jewel. This is what then causes the even start to fall, and Aragorn witnesses Arwen's death again. Now, along with the added Palantir scene, we also have Éowyn and Faramir. In the Houses of the Healing, they flesh out their relationship and have the two finally meeting. Obviously, Faramir's a bit like, what's with all these shrines of Aragorn you have about your room? In the end though, she admits she only loved the idea of him and not what he truly was. When asking if she wants to go to him, she says she doesn't. She realized she didn't want to do this because she likes Faramir more. So like, the rejected get together on a rebound. She's second best for Aragorn and he's second best for his dad, and doing this breakdown I realized like Faramir's whole character arc is like being second best. Yay, nice one. Just kill me. Anyway, while this is going on, Frodo and Sam hit chapter 12, titled In the Land of Shadow. It's a dreadful journey across Mordor. Happening as Theoden's dying, it's a bit of trek with the last of the Lembas bread. They know that Gollum is still alive as well and constantly look over their shoulder. 40 miles from Mount Doom, they find some bramble to sleep in. That night, Sam looks at a twinkling star and we get a really poignant moment. He realizes that there's still beauty in the world, but at this moment, it's just out of reach.
Mr. Frodo. Look. There is light and beauty up there that no shadow can touch.
This is actually the Even Star, which is what Arwen was named after. Walking the next day, they spot the orc camp we see in the movie. They say, though it's as bad as they expected, they still have to do it. Frodo then gives Sam Sting. He realizes he's not strong enough to use a sword, and is truly on his last leg. This is also when they see Gollum. At that moment, he caught a glimpse of a black form or shadow flitting among the rocks away near Frodo's hiding place. Biting back a cry, he leapt down from the spring and ran, jumping from stone to stone. It was a wary creature, difficult to see, but Sam had little doubt about it. He longed to get his hands on his neck, but he heard him coming and slipped away quietly. Sam thought he saw a last fleeting glimpse of it, peering back over the edge of the eastward precipice, before it ducked and disappeared. Now obviously in the film, they hold out his reveal because we're supposed to believe he's dead. A bit I love though is that Sam gives Frodo a bottle of water so he has something to drink in the night. Frodo doesn't drink from it, but they awaken to find the bottle empty. No sign of Gollum. Seeing the army heading towards them, they then pretend to be asleep. Lots pass by and they almost make it, but then an orc whips them. That's something that happens in the movie. But Frodo, it's torment and it soon becomes a nightmare. Completely exhausted, a line that really stands out is there was no hope. At 3 hours and 11 minutes, we also see a fat orc. This was said to be based on Harvey Weinstein, who originally produced the project. Jackson included the Weinstein names over the picture of two trolls in the credits, which was supposed to show what he thought of the pair. He almost derailed the entire trilogy and he had a lucky escape. So he represents the man that's fighting them, which is such a funny inclusion. Finally, they see a gap and escape, but Frodo collapses completely lifeless. In the film, they cause a fight to get away, and I love how Sam says, "You filthy maggot." All that's only in the extended edition though, and in the theatrical, they just arrive at Mount Doom. Tossing away their armor, this also includes Sam's pots and pans. They're truly leaving everything behind and making this as their last charge. The clatter of his precious pans as they fell down into the dark was like a death knell to his heart. Notice the word precious there, and how this last reminder of home is what really mattered to Sam. In the work, this is when he says to share the load, but it's lighten the load instead. He offers to carry the ring, and suddenly Frodo comes alive with new energy. As Frodo walks forth, you might notice he swats the air. The book tells us that this is him blocking the sight of the Great Eye. His lips are blistered and dry, his skin's sore, and there's no water. In the book, the final step of the journey takes place over 4 days, and they basically just stumble forth. Their throats get so dry they can't even swallow food, and you really feel the heat coming off the pages. Sam again tries to offer help, and in the book it says Frodo's hand goes to his sword. However, he explains it's his burden, and that Sam must understand. Deep down, I think he just doesn't want his friend to be taken by it too, as Sam's the one good thing left in his world. Hope is swatted here though when the eye spots them. Though Frodo falls to the ground, it's still aware of the figures in its land. Now across the land we get chapter 10, The Black Gate Opens. This is the final chapter of book 1, which initially starts with the journey. Merry's ashamed he's too weak to go with them, whereas in the movie we see as he rides out. They all journey to the gate and there's threats along the way. Ambushed by the forces of evil, the Nazgul swoop overhead and every step's filled with gloom. And from that evening onward, the Nazgul came and followed every move of the army. They still flew high and out of sight of all save Legolas, and yet their presence could be felt, as a deepening of shadow and a dimming of the sun. And though the ringwraiths did not yet stoop low upon their foes and were silent, uttering no cry, the dread of them could not be shaken off. After passing through the marshes, they then reach the gate. In the book, the Nazgul gather and hover on the walls like vultures, desperately waiting to feast. It's in this that the gate opens, and they're greeted by the mouth of Sauron. At its head there rode a tall and evil shape, mounted upon a black horse. if horse it was, for it was huge and hideous, and its face was a frightful mask, more like a skull than a living head, and in the sockets of its eyes and in the nostrils there burned a flame. The design in the movie reminds me a lot of a xenomorph, with there being touches of the alien queen. This scene was cut from the theatrical release, though there was a clue it happened. As Aragorn gives his speech in front of the Black Gate, you can see his blades covered in black blood. The Blood Orc spray is this colour, and thus it was clear that he killed one. Played by Bruce Spence, his mouth was digitally enlarged to make it bigger. According to IMDb trivia, they also put gashes and cuts in it to show how much it cost in speaking Sauron's words. Originally, they wanted hooks holding it open, but it made it impossible to speak. Around the helmet, we also have runes that say Laman Gothar. The word Laman means voice, and Gothar means dread abomination. This is told to us in the Silmarillion, which gives him his full name. They also do something very subtle in the sound mixing, and as he talks, you can also hear Sauron.
Old Greybeard.
As for his history, we get a rough background of where he came from, but it is told that he was a renegade who came from the race of those that are named the Black Númenóreans, for they established their dwellings in Middle-earth during the years of Sauron's domination, and they worshipped him, being enamoured of evil knowledge, and he entered the service of the Dark Tower when it first rose again, and because of his cunning he grew even higher in the Lord's favour, and he learned great sorcery, and knew much of the mind of Sauron, and he was more cruel than any orc. Mocking Aragorn in the book, he says it takes more than elvish glass to make a king.
It takes more to make a king than a broken elvish blade.
This is when Aragorn kills him in the film, but he survives in the book. Bringing up Frodo, he says he'll be tortured if they refuse to back down. Giving forth terms, Sauron wants all the land west of the Anduin, as far as the Misty Mountains and the Gap of Rohan. These will all be tribute to Sauron, and they'll help to rebuild Isengard. However, rather than giving it to Sauron as promised, his lieutenant will sit there. Gandalf then removes his cloak and his white light shines, and he basically tells him to shove his terms up his arse. The mouth stops laughing and he gallops to the gate right as they behead him in the movie. Pippin does wish he could smite him though, and then score-wise he'd be equal to Merry. We then see as the crowd of orcs surround them, and what shape does it make? You guessed it, mate, a ring. I love how Gimli says he never thought he'd die side by side with an elf, and Legolas says, what about side by side with a friend? Gives me goosebumps there, and it just shows the true meaning of the film is about unity and coming together. The battle then begins, and in the film we get Aragorn say,
For Frodo.
Initially, it seems the eye hypnotizes him, almost like what happened with Isildur, but he breaks this and stands with his friends. This sums up everything about the character and why he's the perfect king. He will give up his own life to honor even the smallest of us. However, it also shows that there's a side of him that believes the mouth might have been telling the truth. So this is in memory of Frodo to honor how he gave his life fighting darkness. In the music, we can also hear an elvish voice singing. This translates to, if by my life or death I can protect you, I will. I give you my sword. These are the same things Aragorn said to Frodo in Fellowship. It's such a good way to kick off the fight, and I love how it plays out. Now, though we mentioned earlier how the troll was used to replace Sauron, they do have one in the book. Pippin ends up stabbing it in the foot, but then it falls on top of him. It ends the chapter on a cliffhanger, as it seems like he's died. However, we then get some hope, and end by hearing the eagles are coming. That takes us to chapter 13, titled Mount Doom. This is the last chapter of the journey, and the pair are too worn out to feel fear. Looking at the towering mountain, Sam finally realizes the gravity of the situation, and when the task was done, there they would come to an end, alone, houseless, foodless in the midst of a terrible desert. There could be no return. However, he reassures himself that this is what he promised to do, and if he dies, it will still be with Frodo. Well, if that is the job, then I must do it. But I would dearly like to have seen Bywater again, and Rosie Cotton, and her brothers, and the Gaffer and Marigold and all. I can't think somehow that Gandalf would have sent Mr. Frodo on this errand if there hadn't have been any hope of his ever coming back at all. Perfect impression there, and another brilliant passage in the book, and they get some strength seeing how close they are. It's at this point that they then drop the line,
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you.
Sam staggered to his feet, and then to his amazement he felt the burden light. He had feared that he would have barely strength to lift his master alone, and beyond that he had expected to share in the dreadful dragging weight of the accursed ring. whether because Frodo was so worn by his long pains, wound of knife and venomous sting, and sorrow, fear, and homeless wandering, or because some gift of final strength was given to him. Sam lifted Frodo with no more difficulty than if you were carrying a hobbit child piggyback in some romp on the lawns or hayfields of the Shire. He took a deep breath and started off. The work then says that the eye was not turned to them, and it's in this that he makes a break for it. However, hope is dashed with Gollum's ambush. Sam hears the voice he hates and it utters, "Wicked master cheats us." In the movie though, they alter it slightly to dash our hopes even more.
Smeagol promised!
Smeagol was always the good one, and it's who Frodo thought he brought back. However, Smeagol has always been a killer, and Smeagol being a liar highlights both sides are corrupted now. He's still that killer that we saw at the start, and everything's been part of his manipulation. In the book though, he is slightly more sympathetic. He begs the pair to spare the ring, saying that if the ring dies, he'll turn to dust too. It somewhat foreshadows his fate. Sam kicks him away, and then the creature scurries down the path. But if he had looked back, he might have seen not far below Gollum turn again, and then with a wild light of madness glaring in his eyes, comes swiftly but warily, creeping on behind, a slinking shadow among the stones. Anyway, across at the battle, the Nazgûl swoop in and finally join the fight. However, the little moth arrives, and this ushers in the return of the Eagles. There came Gohir the Windlord, and Lanroval his brother, mightiest of the descendants of old Thorondor, who built his eyries in inaccessible peaks of the encircling mountains when Middle-earth was young. Behind them in long swift lines came all their vassals from the northern mountains, speeding on a gathering wing. Straight down upon the Nazgûl they bore, stooping suddenly out of the high airs, and the rush of their wide wings as they passed over was like a gale. The eagle itself was based on Tolkien's local pub, in which the sign was an eagle carrying a boy, which leads into him saving Frodo at the end. At the cracks of doom, we then see as Frodo puts on the ring. "But I do not choose now what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." And suddenly as he set it on his finger, he vanished from Sam's sight. Sam gasped, but he had no chance to cry out, for at that moment, many things happened. It really makes you feel a sense of loss, and it perfectly reflects Smeagol. Just like how we lost him, we've now lost Frodo. In the film, the ring swings and it starts to seduce him, with it finally winning out in the end. In both the book and film, it's really similar to Isildur, and it just destroys all hope. Personally, I feel like it's Tolkien acknowledging that evil can be too strong to resist alone. However, when we work together, it's then that we have the strength to stand up to it. At this point, someone strikes Sam from behind, and in the work, we don't learn who this is at first. It says everything turns black, but we obviously figure out it's Gollum. Rushing Frodo, Gollum truly becomes the most important person in the story. Had he not guided them through Mordor, they wouldn't have got here, and had he not jumped him, the ring would still be around. It highlights how important it is to not overlook anything, as even the smallest things can come into play. It's sort of a butterfly effect, and it makes Gollum the figure at the heart of this story, in my opinion anyway. In the book, after Gollum's death, Frodo even remembers the words that Gandalf said to him. The Dark Lord was suddenly aware of him, and his eye piercing all shadows looked across the plain to the door that he had made, and the magnitude of his own folly was revealed to him in a blinding flash, and all the devices of his enemies were at last laid bare. Then his wrath blazed in consuming flame, but his fear rose like a vast black smoke to choke him, for he knew his deadly peril, and the thread upon which his doom now hung. From all his policies and webs of fear and treachery, from all the stratagems and wars his mind shook free, and throughout his realm a tremor ran. His slaves quailed, and his armies halted, and his captains, suddenly steerless, bereft of will, wavered and despaired, for they were forgotten. The whole mind and purpose of the power that wielded them was now bent with overwhelming force upon the mountain. At his summons, wheeling with a rending cry, in a last desperate race there flew, faster than the winds, the Nazgûl, and with a storm of wings they hurtled southward towards Mount Doom. Sam then gets up just like in the movie and sees Frodo sway back and forth. In the film, we watch him bite off his finger, and finally he gains his precious. I adore the way his face changes, and it's laced with a smile, but also with a hint of sadness. Finally, he's gained what he was after, which is a very joyous moment. However, the sadness is also there because he couldn't escape it. It's kind of like when you're on a diet and Domino's do 50% off, so you buy it, eat it, and you're happy because it was tasty, but you're also disappointed because you have no self-control. Great metaphor that, but it's extremely empowering for the character. When discussing this moment, Circus said it's the first time Gollum stands on 2 feet. The actor went into how this was empowering and that the ring made him stand up. In the book, it's in this celebration that he ends up toppling over. And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then with a shriek he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail, Precious, and he was gone. I would have liked to have seen him lose his balance in the film because he's not used to standing up. What happens though is Frodo rushes him and both go over the edge. It does allow Frodo to redeem himself though, as he charges him with enough force to send him over. We then follow Gollum as he goes into the lava and he doesn't even realise what's going on. He's so besotted with his precious, he's completely blind to the world around him. However, even in the end, the ring is treacherous. Just that look on his face as he realises he's dead, he just sees everything for how it really is. Gollum's the last victim of the ring, and sadly his addiction cost him in the end. Sitting on the surface of the lava, I also love how it makes the ring seem like it's fighting against its own destruction. Frodo's still hanging on the edge, and in death it's almost like it's beckoning to him. You even get the feeling that Frodo's looking at it, wondering if there's a way he can grab it. In the end, it's Sam who saves him, with it bringing things full circle from Fellowship. There Sam raced after Frodo, and Frodo stuck his hand into the water. It's no coincidence that the shot of Frodo grabbing his hand there is also done in a similar way here. Sam reaches down and grabs Frodo's hand, and side by side, everything comes together. So at this point, the ring then falls into the lava, almost like it's given up itself. Towers fell and mountains slid, walls crumbled and melted, crashing down. Vast spires of smoke and spouting steams went billowing up until they toppled like an overwhelming wave, and its wild crest curled and came foaming down upon the land. We see this happening in the film, but the creative team were worried about how to portray the destruction of the tower. 9/11 had happened just 2 years prior, and the Two Towers, the title had already skirted close to that. So instead, they went towards having it implode. Jackson said he was inspired by the collapse of the Tower of Babel, and then this brings this all crashing down. We see this wave sweep out, and then on the battlefield kill all the orcs. It's very convenient, and one of those things you have to suspend your disbelief for, because there would have definitely been some fighting in the middle. Though elements of the scoring of the Shire were filmed, they felt this would be a tidier way to handle getting rid of all the orcs. Across with Frodo and Sam, the chapter ends with them feeling joy in the face of death. Even though they feel they won't survive, there's a sense of relief now the burden's gone. At this point, the character sections finally join up. All the works have been split into 2 books, with different journeys taking focus as the characters split. For example, the first book of The Two Towers is all Aragorn's story, whereas the second book's Frodo. So that's been the same thing in Return of the King, but the characters now come together. That takes us to chapter 14, The Field of Cormallen. As the earth groans, they realize Frodo succeeded, and the enemies scatter like dust in the wind. Gandalf asks Gwaihir to bear him again, and says that he must be swifter than the Nazgul. It replays the end of the chapter with Frodo, and in both book and movie, we get the line,
Glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee. Here at the end of all things.
Sam even adds a bit more hope and says he could go just a little bit further. Though they're doomed, he still wonders if they can do a couple more steps. It shows his perseverance and willpower, and it highlights what took them to the end. Sam says he wishes he could live to hear the tale of Nine-Fingered Frodo and the Ring of Doom. He says he'd sit and wonder and gaze like how he did with the story of Beren. Closing his eyes, he then drifts off and we fade to black. In the work, when he wakes up, he initially believes it's a dream and can't believe he's seeing all the green and gold. Sam is told what happened in the aftermath, and Gandalf simply says, a great shadow departed. In the film, they obviously want to keep us in the action, and we see as the Eagles arrive. This moment was based on the work of John Howe, with them flying over the Black Gate to arrive at Doom. In the film, we then fade from Frodo being carried to him, once more recovering in Rivendell. It's very reminiscent of the scene from Fellowship, and it takes us back to the location. In the work, Gandalf then explains it's the 8th of April. He says that the new year in Gondor now begins March 25th, which is when Sauron fell and they were brought the new king. Gandalf also reveals they found Galadriel's file along with Sam's box of salt. Yay! He returns from Two Towers. Waking up, they then walk through and see Aragorn. On the throne sat a mail-clad man. A great sword was laid across his knees, but he wore no helm. As they drew near, he rose, and then they knew him, changed as he was, so high and glad of face, kingly, lord of men, dark-haired with eyes of grey. It's at this point in the book he bows to the hobbits, which takes Sam by surprise. In the film, they have an entire crowd doing this, whereas in the book, it's just him and his gods.
My friends, you bow to no one.
Sam also notices Merry and Pippin have grown too. There's the mention of Entdraft, and finally the gang reunite. In the movie, everyone comes in one by one, and it's kind of like This Is Your Life. That then takes us to chapter 15, The Steward and the King. It's actually quite heavily based around Eowyn and Faramir, and it takes place earlier in the story. This is as Gandalf and Co ride out, and the pair wonder what's going to happen. Eowyn is now the heir to Rohan, and technically Faramir's the steward. It's basically a big chapter about them falling in love, which did kind of kill the pacing when I read it. We then have a couple of days pass, and then Aragorn returns. Faramir then calls him king and gives him the crown of Erna. This was the last king, and that cements the line's being restored. In the film, he's crowned by Gandalf, with the book detailing its design. Built to resemble the helms of the gods of the Citadel, it also has a wing-like design. This is to tie into the kings who came from overseas and decided to settle in Gondor, but the film may also add in the tree on the front and Arwen's evening star on the side. The tree also blooms in the courtyard, with it being full of flowers. In the film, Aragorn then sings a song composed by Mortensen himself. As we mentioned last time, he learned Elvish for the films, and he reworked another section from the book. This talks about how he'd come from the Great Seed of Middle-earth, and now his heirs were guarding domain until the end of the world. Elendil said this upon arriving from Numenor as well. This is also the song that plays when Aragorn sees the Argonautan Fellowship. You might also notice Legolas has a crown as well. His father was the Elven King Thranduil, which makes him a prince. We meet that character in The Hobbit, and I appreciate Jackson put it here long before making those movies. Arwen then arrives along with the elves, and I love how Hugo Weaving portrays this. Guy's sobbing in the background as he gives away his daughter, and he's basically seeing his two kids get married. Not like that. Elrond raised Aragorn like a son, and now he's looking at what they've become. The scene of the Hobbits with everyone bowing was also the last shot of principal photography. Even though Mortensen had finished filming at this shot, he still came back so they could play against him. Jackson said this was his favourite scene in the trilogy, and it kinda wrapped up everything. In the work, Faramir then shouts, "Behold the king," and Aragorn then starts his royal duties. Firstly, he pardons the Easterlings that surrendered. He also makes peace with the people of Harad. Aragorn is forgiven for leaving his post due to his valour in battle, and he's made a god to Faramir. Then they look out over the land and announce the Third Age has ended. A new age begins, and the tree sheds saplings to represent new life. However, there is a bit of sorrow. Gandalf says that the Third Age was his, and with his enemy Sauron gone, he must go too. That takes us to chapter 16, which is titled Many Partings. In the work, it's a big journey in which they want to travel out to Rivendell to see Bilbo. Arwen also gives them the star. They also journey to Rohan to witness Theoden's funeral. Merry cries at the grave and says he was like a father. Eowyn gives him an ancient horn as a parting gift, and the group then travel to Helm's Deep. Legolas and Gimli both keep the promises that they made in Two Towers. Legolas goes to the Glittering Caves, and Gimli then journeys to Fangorn. Isengard is then dismantled and turned into a garden full of trees. Treebeard tells them Saruman would often go to the window and ask for news, as that's the only way he'd get it. However, he has since vanished. Gandalf says the snake still has one tooth, which foreshadows what's to come. Aragorn claims Orthanc, and as they begin to depart, he says that's the real ending of the Fellowship. Treebeard then says the world is changing, and he basically delivers the monologue from the opening of Fellowship.
The world is changed.
Merry and Pippin have one more drink with him and promise to give him news of Entwives. The group then journey to the Gap of Rohan, which is when they say goodbye to Aragorn. It's really sad, but he says they're still Knights of Gondor, so we'll just pretend you're on leave. He says he might call for them again, so it's more of a goodbye for now, rather than farewell. They say they wish they had a Palantir to talk to him and hope to see him again. This montage is all handled in the movie visually, and we get a big shot of the map as we travel across it. That then takes us to the Shire, which is a big deviation from the book. I'm going to go into that now so you at least have a complete view of what happened. Now this spreads out from when they travel home and they see Saruman on the 6th day. Grima's alongside him and described as a shell of a man. They ask for some weed and they give him some back since that's what they stole from him in Isengard. Saruman loves it, and 420 blazed at. Finally, they reach Rivendell and then shift the scene from here to the end of the movie. Bilbo's described as old but peaceful, and he asks what happened to his ring. He says that it's nearly his birthday and that he's gonna be 129. If he makes it to 130, he'll rival Old Tuck, which will make him the oldest hobbit that ever lived. Bilbo then sings The Road Goes Ever On and On before falling asleep, and the younger hobbits then head for the Shire. That takes us to Homeward Bound, which is when Frodo's shoulder starts playing up. He says there's no real going back and that they're all changed by the journey. Camping near Weathertop, Frodo won't look at the tower, and in the morning he makes them leave early. They also reach Bree and stay at the Prancing Pony. It's now 5 stars on TripAdvisor and the place to be, but Butterbuzz shocked to learn that Strider's now the king and the whole town seems better. To top things off, we also learn Bill the Pony returned here, which Sam's over the moon about. I'm glad to see you back. They then go past Tom's place and expect to see him there, but sadly he's not. Gandalf then departs, which takes us to the scouring of the Shire. From the one picture in my book, I don't know how well you can see that, but it basically shows a factory tower in the middle of the Shire. It's here where Tolkien really drives home his anti-industrial message and how it destroys the land. Arriving at the inn, there's no fun of drinking, just a list of rules. Pippin tears this down, but a sheriff arrives and says they're arrested. That's sheriff, not sheriff. They laugh in his face, but agree to be escorted by his officers. The whole way, the gang laugh at them, and Merry basically orders them about. "You mugs, go faster." Passing Sam's dad Gaffer, he jokes who's arrested who. Eventually, the sheriffs can't keep up with the pace and lack of food, and they let them ride off. Here, they then spot a tall chimney at Bag End, which is pouring black smoke into the air. Obviously, you have your similarities to Mount Doom there, and it kinda hammers home the subtext. Learning that Saruman's taken over, the group are then accosted by some ruffians. Announcing themselves as the Knights of Gondor, they scare them off. Rosie's dad arrives and says he's glad they're back. He's wanted to stand up to them for a while, but the other hobbits wouldn't join him. Rosie and Sam then have a bit of a flirt before they decide to mount up. Not like that. Inspired by the Fellowship, 100 hobbits gather carrying axes and bows. They surround the rest of the ruffians and then kill the leader. The rest of them give up, and no more arrive the next day. The Tooks do too. Called the Battle of Bywater, this goes down in 1419. The hobbits win, obviously, and it's said to be the last battle fought in the Shire. Travelling into the centre, they tear up seeing every tree's gone. Even Sam's vision in the mirror had not prepared him for what they saw. They've even cut down the tree where Bilbo stood and made his farewell speech. In the centre, they catch Saruman and the hobbits surround him. Saying kill him, he replies by saying, "And if my blood stains the Shire, it shall wither and never again be healed." Obviously, he operates in deception, and Frodo says not to believe him. Frodo says they should spare him though, in the hopes that one day he'll be cured of his wickedness. Saruman rose to his feet and stared at Frodo. There was a strange look in his eyes of mingled wonder and respect and hatred. "You have grown, halfling." Leaving, they offer Wormtongue a chance to stay. He turns and hesitates, but Saruman reveals that Wormtongue killed a hobbit as they slept. That was LOTR, who the pair used as an overseer to take over the region. Wormtongue says Saruman told him to do it, and after being kicked, he stabs his master in the back. Wormtongue's then shot with an arrow, and both their bodies slump to the floor. However, a mist comes out of Saruman's corpse. For a moment it wavered, looking to the west, but out of the west came a cold wind, and it bent away, and with a sigh, dissolved into nothing. So basically, his spirit was rejected by Valinor, and now he's gone into the ether. It's something that stuck with me for a while, and the final boss is vanquished. That takes us to the Grey Havens, and they release the prisoners. Fatty Bolger has been starved, and they joke that he's not fatty anymore, which he's been starved to close to death, mate, so maybe not the time for a joke? Lobelia is very old and thin as well, and she's been confined to a dark, narrow cell. She gives Bag End back to Frodo, and we learn she went back to Hardbottle. Lobelia sadly died the next spring, and even though she wasn't the best, let's be honest, it's still pretty sad. With the Shire though, it says the hobbits work like bees, and they have 1,000 willing hands. They restore Bagshot Row, and Sam helps rebuild the gardens. Galadriel gave him seeds as a gift, and he plants them into the soil. Eventually they form great trees, and 1420 is said to be a marvellous year. In the film, they skip all that and go back to see nothing's changed. Kind of funny just seeing the same guy working in the garden and everyone's just in their own little world, which I think works really well for the movie. At the Green Dragon, we see as the group sit in silence and can't really talk about what they've gone through. This is something Tolkien said he experienced in real life when he was recounting his tales of war. Upon returning home, he said he found it difficult to discuss with his neighbours as none of them could really comprehend it. All of them were changed forever. At this point, Sam then plucks up the courage to ask Rosie out, and in both the film and book, he ends up marrying her. You might also notice that Frodo wears white to the wedding. Petty bitch! We learn that Merry and Pippin also go on to live in Crickhollow, and everyone finally seems settled. Sam Gamgee married Rose Cotton in the spring of 1420, which was also famous for its weddings, and they came and lived at Bag End. Sam ends up becoming the mayor, which we can also see as Frodo writes his book. If you look closely at the pages, you'll also see see that it says asking Rosie to marry him was the bravest thing he ever did. This has not only There and Back Again, but also The Lord of the Rings. Things come full circle from Fellowship, and Frodo now sits in the same place that Bilbo was. The camera shots are framed in the same way, with us getting a long shot that then takes us to him sat there. A nice touch is that you can also see his missing finger, which constantly reminds him of the ring. In the work they say Frodo still pines for it, and Sam sometimes catches him muttering away. He says it's like a wound that will never really heal. But there is joy too. Sam and Rosie have a child and call her Eleanor, but they did consider calling them Frodo if it was a boy. The second child is who they gave that name to, and you can see Sam mouth it in the film as he returns. There his daughter plays his daughter in the movie, which is a really nice touch. Sarah McLeod also holds her own baby daughter, with this being little Frodo. In the work we then learn that Bilbo's now past the age of old Took, and Frodo decides to go and see him. Giving Sam the keys, he also leaves him with the book. Saying chapter 80 isn't finished, the final pages of the story are left to Sam.
The last pages are for you, Sam.
Travelling out to Rivendell, it's a trip down memory lane. They pass where they met the Black Riders and meet the Elven Lords on the road. In the movie, Bilbo sat next to Frodo and he's still asking about the ring. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever had a relative with dementia, but you just say whatever you can to soothe them. Obviously, Frodo doesn't want to make the guy feel pain for nearly destroying all of Middle-earth, so he just says that he lost it. In this though, I think he also realises that you never really stop pining for the ring. He too will be cursed to think of it, and thus it cements his decision. In the book and film, he decides to ride to the west and journey out with the elves. I love how Bilbo also says he's ready for another adventure, and what a great way to see the character go off. Ring bearers are allowed to make this journey as well, so technically he can go too. Sam's shocked though, as he thought Frodo would enjoy the Shire for years to come. Frodo thought he would too, but it's time to say goodbye. Merry and Pippin figured it out though, and this is why they came. They said he tried to give them the slip once, and now they know what he's up to. However, in the film, they don't know, and I'd be lying if I say I didn't cry throughout this scene. Then Elrond and Galadriel rode on, for the Third Age was over, and the days of the rings were past, and an end had come of the story and the songs of those times. Here, you might also spot the new ring on Gandalf's finger. This is the ring Noria. Círdan then has them board, then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard, and the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship slipped away down the long grey firth, and the light of the glass of Galadriel that Frodo bore glimmered and was lost. The book then has Sam standing at the shore watching it go, and out of them all he's the last person to leave. Turning back and journeying home, we then close out the film with the final line of the book.
Well, I'm back.
This also makes Sam the first and last person in the Fellowship that we see in the entire trilogy, which is a great full circle moment. From here we then cut to Alan Lee's drawings of the characters for the credits. Accompanied by Annie Lennox's outstanding song, it's the perfect way to close out the trilogy. And that also closes out our breakdown, and huge thank you if you've watched until this point. It's been my own journey through darkness, and this trilogy is by far the most work I've put into a breakdown. Reading the books alongside it, making notes, then organising them, and then doing my script, and then recording it. It's been exhausting. However, I've had my own fellowship on the way who've edited these videos. So huge thank you to Steesh, Matt, John, Alexa, Griffin, Lawrence, and Cade. All of you guys have helped share the load, and I hope you guys have also enjoyed the series. Return of the King would of course go on to kill it at the Oscars with it picking up 11 awards. It tops off one of, if not the greatest trilogy of all time, and every film is its own masterpiece. It's crazy how it's gone on to influence not only film but also fantasy as a whole. Sometimes you'll see headlines like it's a pipeline to the alt-right, and it's sad that it's been pulled into the culture war when this movie's above it all. But these films are in fact a gateway to that, and I did 6 hours of Lord of the Rings analysis just to own the libs. Seatbelts are woke. I've ruined the video there, haven't I? Now it's been an absolute joy going back through them, and huge thank you for all your support. Did you know that members of the channel get videos like this early, and for just 99 pence you'll get early access to our breakdowns. They go up a week before they get shared publicly, and it just makes a massive difference on the channel. Because of you, we're able to focus on these older films and really take our time without worrying about paying the bills and keeping our staff financially stable. So it really means a lot, and huge thank you to everyone who does it. It really does mean the world. You can also follow us at Heavy Spoilers on Instagram to keep up to date with everything. Please drop a like on the video as well, and if you want something else to watch, we've got a video on screen right now. With that out of the way, huge thank you for sitting through the video. I've been your host Paul. I'm ready for another adventure, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, peace.